Hello, you are listening to Trump Republic Radio. It is August 13th, 2017. As always, I'm your host, Enzo Quesada, and I'm joined by my co-host, Bobby Hester.
Hello, everyone.
And this week, we got a doozy of a show, I think. We got a lot of pretty interesting stuff to go over. But before we get into what we want to get into, I think we're going to make a statement on what's on a lot of people's minds right now. And that's just the stuff that's happening in Charlottesville. We don't want to go too deep into this topic, but we don't like the violence that's happening out there, obviously. We think it's terrible that 3 people have died at this point. 2 police officers and a counter-protester. And we're not going to go into it because that's just not what we talk about on the show. Me and you are both just people that voted for Donald Trump, and we want to see his policies enacted. That's just why we voted for him. We didn't vote for him because of some sort of hateful reason. Bobby, is there anything you want to say on it?
Yeah, I would just like to say that, I hope the violence doesn't have to continue. That's not what we want to see in our country. That's not how you make the country great again, is by violence. Peaceful resolutions, enact policies, make a change for the good. That's why we voted for him. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, this isn't helping anything good happen in the country at the moment. It's really bad. And we don't like the direction appears that we may be heading. But let's get into the rest of the show that we want to get into after we make that statement.
All
just
right,
so
let's
people
do it,
know.
then.
The first thing that we wanted to talk about, though, is this stuff that's happening in North Korea, because also this is like the closest thing we've had to like the Cuban Missile Crisis.
It's almost like the Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0. Almost.
In a huge sense. So the negotiating skills of Donald Trump could never be more needed than right now. And do you want to head into some facts that we got on the situation at the moment?
Yeah, let's go straight into
it. Let's give you an update on this North Korean situation. We've been reporting on this since the very beginning of doing the show, which is, 6 months almost at this point?
Just over 6 months, yeah.
Just over 6 months. We've been talking about North Korea since the very first episode. News almost every single week, or at least every other week. But this situation has really gotten out of hand really quick. I think it's really dumbfounding how it just accelerated so quickly after they sent that missile that, we found out they're in the range of half the United States. It's insane. Texas, where we live, would not be in that range, but most of the West Coast is.
Yeah, and that's the big issue, is the entire West Coast plus Hawaii and other territories that we have like Guam, including our allies in the area like Japan and South Korea, they're all within that range. And that's
Guam is actually at the biggest risk of all American territory.
And we're going to get into that.
Bobby, did you see what the mayor or the governor of Guam said? I don't know if it's a mayor or governor, but the leader of Guam.
What did he say?
He called Donald Trump on the phone and he said, I appreciate everything that you're doing for us at the moment. The media plays it out that, you're doing the wrong thing out there. But I just want it to be known that you have 100% my support on what you're doing out there, because I know you see the best interests of the people that I serve in Guam. I'm summarizing a bit, but that's essentially the phone call.
I mean, that's great because, I guess we can talk about Guam really first. And the entire reason that's coming up is because North Korea says that they are considering striking Guam with one of their missiles.
Yes.
Which, that would be an absolutely terrible idea because, if North Korea even attacks any one of our territories or the U.S. itself, we have to respond with absolute full force.
No question.
There wouldn't really be much of a North Korea left by the time this is done.
Now, just to give people a little more insight on Guam, if they don't know, Guam is in Micronesia. It is a U.S. island territory, not a state. It's in the West Pacific. It has around 160,000 people that live in Guam, so not a very highly populated place. But definitely lives that we have a duty to protect no matter what happens. I think looking at North Korea at the moment, one thing I did want to go into, I read an article from the New York Times. I read these newspapers so you don't have to. But it was a good article, regardless, because it really highlighted how Japan and South Korea were playing kind of an interesting role in producing more arms race. You think about Japan, they haven't been militaristic since we disarmed them after the Second World War. And there is talk right now to change the constitution so they can start building up their military, because they do see, a war with North Korea as a gigantic threat to the public. And the public is getting, pretty talkative about a very taboo subject in increasing the military. And, another thing I just want to touch on also is the South Korean element. South Korea is at way more risk of missile attack than Japan. The hatred that the North Koreans have for the South Koreans is immense, even though they're brothers, essentially. And that is prompting a lot of uptick in military spending out in South Korea. They actually just voted to turn down installing some American missile defenses there. Oddly, we have troops there. But I think they're going to be changing their perspective on that. They do need permission of the United States, according to the Korean War, to produce anti-missile defense of the... They need to legislate permission to do that, to ask the United States to do it. Kind of a strange situation, but the one thing I do want to note as well, if I don't think people understand, is the Japanese also hate the South Koreans a lot. So they do see South Korea as a threat as well, and they're building their military. So that's going to prompt the Japanese to do it more so. The South Koreans are talking about the potential of getting a nuclear weapon, or at least getting American nuclear weapons there. And Japan, being the victim of nuclear weapons, the only nation to ever be hit by a nuclear weapon, there's always been a strong anti-nuclear sentiment, but they're saying with this new South Korean talk, these talks are coming back into Japan. Really crazy situation. The Chinese, they're doing war games at the same time to, assert their dominance, and they said the United States violated their zone they cordoned off. I don't really trust Chinese government statements a lot, but the Chinese do play an element in this, and they don't want refugees from North Korea, so it's messy. You have some comments on this, Bobby?
Well, I was going to make a comment. You had mentioned that China was doing war games. The U.S. itself, we sent 2 of our B-1 bombers to Guam, and they practiced several bombing runs, just in case they have to use them. And I think it was the U.S. Pacific Command actually even tweeted out saying that, they were ready to fight if they get the call. So it's a situation that seems like it's spiraling towards chaos at this moment.
Yes.
But it seemed like earlier this week, everything was so close, but it's kind of calmed down since then.
I think around Wednesday it peaked, in my opinion.
Yeah, earlier
Tuesday, Wednesday. But it has been a little softer in how it's been going the last couple of days. I mean, Kim Jong-un knows if he does anything, it's the end of his regime. But I do think at this point, he understands that there is an end to the regime eventually in North Korea. It's unsustainable what they're doing. Might as well play your cards and just take out some revenge on these enemies and have a legacy when you die. So it is very dangerous. Now, the talks I've seen at the moment, they're saying that there is very good odds that the North Koreans have mini nuclear warheads that they can place in these intercontinental and interregional ballistics they have, and they are guesstimating they have around 10.
Yeah, that's actually what some of our U.S. intelligence officials from the Defense Intelligence Agency, they had an analysis that said that North Korea has successfully produced those miniature nuclear warheads. So it's not even to the point where we're questioning whether or not they do it. They have miniature nuclear warheads that can fit in the head of missiles. And
some talk on the right that I've been seeing this past week that I think may or may not be, a true thing, but it is interesting, is the deal with the Iranians has really enabled the North Koreans to pursue the same thing, the nuclear deal that we had with Iran under Obama. And I'm not for upping hostilities with Iran over anything either, because it's not the best right now either. But I do think that allowing Iran to develop nuclear uranium has empowered the North Koreans to do it under the cloak of darkness which they live under as well.
And there has been a lot of talk about past presidents and what they've done and about North Korea, what they've said about North Korea. And a lot of people do bring up this one video from back in, I believe it was 1996, 97, or 98.
I think the Bill Clinton thing?
Yeah, it's the Bill
I
Clinton
think it was
thing.
1994.
Was it 94? Was it that early?
Yeah.
Either way, it was during his presidency when he pretty much said that with their policies that the U.S. passed with North Korea then, North Korea wouldn't be able to get nuclear weapons. And now here we are 20, 25 years later, and they have them. And, you have, like we said, almost like a secondary Cuban Missile Crisis that's happening because of it.
It's really insane. I think we should get into the rhetoric that Trump used that has really highlighted the situation, really kicked off the sentiment of possible war in the United States, and that's Trump's fire and fury statements. Do you want to pull that up, Bobby?
Yeah, I do. Trump pretty much said he was asked during a press conference. Well, it wasn't really a press conference, but it was, he was signing legislation, but he was taking questions from the press. And one of them asked him about what would happen if North Korea made any more threats to the U.S. or if they attacked the United States. And he said if North Korea does that, then they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen before. And a lot of people took that as to mean, oh my God, we're going to nuke North Korea. But, we finally have a president who's actually standing up to North Korea because, like I said, President Clinton, he was the one who's saying North Korea is not going to get nukes because of our policies. President Bush did nothing. President Obama did nothing. And now that it's built up, it's starting to finally, fizzle a little bit. And Trump happens to be president. He's also the one who's actually dealing with the situation, showing force against them. So if it does lead to war, I am happy the fact that we have someone who's, not willing to let American lives be lost in vain if it has to happen. If North Korea launches a missile at Guam and we're not able to shoot it down, Trump's going to respond, and they are going to be seen with fire and fury like the world's never seen, because that's the way that things have to go.
And I think another thing, connected to this fire fury statement we have to think about is, the fire and fury the world has never seen. One thing that, a lot of people criticize, but I think could be a valid point at this point is, Trump calling for an increase in the military budget. Now, I don't think that's very necessary personally, but I can see the rationale of maybe war with North Korea was inevitable, and we could use, more refined, modernized weaponry to take on the threats of the world. It's not from a desire to be a warmonger personally, or to even be involved in anything else in the world, but there's so many countries just right at the moment that are volatile, and when we get into international news, we're going to get into some of those countries, but the North Korean situation just feels very inevitable because the regime was always going to fall, and it wants to go out with a bang.
Yeah, there's no way that after North Korea being, this almost hyper isolationist country to the point where the entire populace is brainwashed into not even knowing what the outside world is like, there's no way that you can continue that indefinitely. It has to pop off at some point, and I think we're seeing, I don't know if I want to say this is the first steps, or I'm sorry, the first stages or the final stages of that, starting to break apart, probably more the first stages. But you're right, it's not able to sustain itself. Eventually, it's going to end, and I don't think that's going to end peacefully.
And I think, I said the world is getting a little more hostile at the moment. China is increasing their military spending. India is increasing their military spending. Iran is increasing the military spending. Saudi Arabia is increasing their spending, a ton, which makes the Middle East so crazy with the kind of polar powers of Saudi Arabia and their light alliance with Israel, facing up against Shiite Iran. It's crazy. There's so many countries increasing their spending. Russia is slightly increasing as well. Germany is looking to rearm.
And if you think about it, one of the things that Trump ran on was trying to get NATO to increase their spending to meet that. Well, I think it was that 2% of GDP.
And a lot of people are getting in line with it.
They are getting in line. So even all individual countries in Europe themselves are increasing their military spending for different reasons, but still increasing it nonetheless.
And the war hawkish, rhetoric we're seeing against Russia, which me and you both are against, is also just increasing a call for spending. And you get your John McCain types and your Lindsey Graham types and your Chuck Schumer types that hate Russia so much they do see it as a viable option to increase military spending to go satisfy these wars that they want to take on. I think one thing we need to acknowledge at the moment is we're changing foreign policy. this is America first, and it is part of a desire to acknowledge that a multipolar global order is established itself, and the Western globalistic order that we see from the post World War II era, it's going away. India is on a fast track rise. China is on a fast track rise to eclipse us in the United States, and I think we just need to acknowledge this and try to do the best we can do with what we have as potential in the United States. And I think we have tons of potential still. And, that's why I voted for Donald Trump. Make America great again. I do see the path to get there. It's a rough path, but solid foreign policy will get us there. And I think this North Korea stuff is the right actions we need to take to just defend ourselves in this world.
I absolutely agree.
Any other things you want to say, or should we move on?
I would just want to say one more thing, and that's if we get involved, or if there is an actual war with North Korea, even though I think if there was a war with North Korea, it wouldn't last very long, if you know what I'm saying. But if there was a military conflict in a large scale, I do feel like other countries probably would get involved, especially China, since, like we said, we reported months ago now that they were sending troops to their border with North Korea in case there was that flow of North Korean refugees, which, like you said, China doesn't want any North Korean refugees to come into their country.
It would be very damaging.
And so that if the U.S. did, launch military airstrikes or missiles, or just, have any type of military force being used against North Korea, China would get involved, at least in some degree, I happen to think. And I feel like if that was the case, I'd almost want China to do as much as I can. That way we don't have to do it all ourselves, risk American lives in the process.
I think I'll make one more statement before we move on North Korea, and it's just this, at the end of the day, is also just a humanitarian crisis. The North Koreans are a populace that is enslaved to Kim Jong-un. Now, there are a lot of fanatical loyalists in that nation that will fight to the very bitter end for, their great leaders that they exalt. But when this shit hits the fan, if there is a war and there is a refugee crisis, there's going to be a lot of lives lost, and it's not what I want. It's really bad for the world.
And keep in mind, North Korea's population is 25 million.
Yeah.
So, in case anyone was wondering what that actually was.
There's plenty of stuff more that can be said on North Korea, but let's just move on, because you can talk about it all day, really.
Yeah, so let's move on.
The next thing we want to get into is these Paul Manafort home raids as in regards to the Russian probe. Do you have some stuff on that, Bobby?
I do. So the news broke earlier this week that FBI agents raided the home of Paul Manafort, who was one of Trump's former campaign chairman during the campaign. But the news broke that they had raided his house in connection to the overall Russia probe that Mueller's got going on right now. But the thing that was interesting in news that came out after this was the fact that it looks bad that they raided his house, but this actually happened several weeks ago, and it never got reported until now. And part of the reason why is because we keep saying a lot that the Russian narrative is dying, but then they'll do something to bring it back. We've seen that happen multiple times. This is exactly that. The Russian narrative was dying this week with all the North Korea talks.
Oh, yes, most definitely.
And I think they said that, Trump's approval rating actually is up, 6 points ever since all this North Korea stuff started?
Yeah, around 45, 46.
Yeah, and he was at, I think he bottomed out around 40, at least in the Rasmussen poll, which tends to be the most accurate. So he's now back up to the mid-40s. But that being said, because the Russian narrative was dying and it wasn't being talked about, they needed something to go on the news to bring it back into light. And so they talked about how Paul Manafort's house got raided by the FBI. But since that happened, weeks ago, it makes you wonder, why didn't anyone talk about it then? Because of the fact that they waited so that they could bring it up now since it looks bad. But what was interesting, what came out through all this, was that all the information that they were looking for in this house was information he had already provided to them voluntarily. So it almost makes you wonder why they even do it in the first place.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about Paul Manafort in particular. This was Donald Trump's campaign manager around the RNC time period. He was only a campaign manager for about a month. After Lewandowski, who got Trump through most of the primaries, they ran such an interesting, unorthodox campaign. But Manafort was more established and brought in to get these guys at the RNC not to challenge Donald Trump's nomination, because there was so much talk of taking it away from him, even though he got all he needed. Remember that roll call vote? That was stressful.
Yeah.
But what I'll say about Paul Manafort is he is someone that has been experienced in a lot of campaigns throughout his life, and one that has brought up the Russian allegations a lot is being part of what was the president before the current one we have in
the Ukraine?
Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych. I believe he was on that campaign. I might be wrong, but I've read a lot on Ukraine, a lot of books on it. He was part of the Yanukovych thing, which a lot of people attribute to having, a pro-Russian stance. Yanukovych himself, so that's some sort of scandal. We're going to go into this on this program, some of the DNC connections with the current Ukrainian government, which, is to the opposite viewpoint of Yanukovych in the Ukraine. The Ukraine's a mess. It's a crazy, very corrupt nation. That's the only thing I could conceive of why they're going after him in the probe. I don't think they're going to get anything.
No.
I mean, this is speculative at this point. We just know the FBI raided it, but...
And like I said, the information they're looking for is information he'd already provided to them, so they didn't even get anything out of the raid. If anything, it was, Mueller using FBI power to kind of scare the administration into lying, knowing that he's serious in his probe.
And I think the thing with Manafort is just when he was working on the Yanukovych campaign, this was much prior to Donald Trump ever announcing that he's going to run. So this is not something he was doing because he wanted to get American influence to, get Donald Trump elected. This is just something that he was hired to do because he's a successful person in this industry of running politics. So I don't know. Anything else on that you want to say, or should we just move on?
Let's move on.
Okay. Next thing we have is some pretty good news out of the Trump administration. It looks like we've cut around 11,000 federal government jobs in the first 6 months of the Trump administration, so cutting back on a ton of bureaucracy. Do you got some more specifics on that, Bobby, for us?
Yeah, I do. This was published in Government Executive, and it says that a July jobs report released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics Friday showed non-postal federal agencies employed about just under 2.2 million workers at the end of the month, which was down 2,200 from June and 10,700 from January when Trump took office. So if you look at that, it adds up to be, right around 11,000 jobs. 11,000 jobs that have been cut since Trump came into office. Now, there is part of this to talk about, and that's the fact that over the past 2 years under Barack Obama in 2015, 2016, he actually added about 50,000 federal workers in his last 2 years. So, in 2 years, you added 50,000. In 6 months, Trump cut 11. So we're still a lot higher than where we were, but the fact that we're actually cutting jobs as opposed to adding them, that's what a lot of people wanted to see from the federal government for a long time, is downsizing and decreasing government power.
And this is something that we've been reporting on this program for months now, just in kind of trickle formats of what we get out of the weeks and by weeks. And just in general, spending the government's down in a lot of sectors. We've done a lot of cuts, and we're getting a lot of bureaucracy out of the way. And, now we can be more productive with our government. It's not costing the taxpayers so much to use something that's just so inefficient. The government is so inefficient. Look at the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's how a lot of the government runs. Look how the post office runs. That's a lot how these entrenched, guaranteed government programs run. So just getting money out of these people's hands and letting it go to productive people and families is much more intuitive of making America great again.
And it's also good to note that, we've said it in the program, but it's still true, the federal debt has gone down by $100 billion since Trump came into office as well. So not only are we, cutting jobs and, I guess, in a way, making government smaller, if you could use that term. I don't know if it's the most accurate or not.
It's not going down immensely.
If anything, it's stalling its growth. if that's a way to say it.
But one thing that goes without saying is under Obama, the last 8 years, the government size has increased and its overreach has increased. And, we are reducing that.
Yes.
By keeping people out of these, agencies. Any other things you want to say on this?
I do. So getting back to what we said about how 11,000 government jobs have been cut since Trump came into office. So that's in his first 6 months. If you're wondering what the first 6 months of George W. Bush and the first 6 months of Barack Obama look like, in the first 6 months of George W. Bush, he added 36,000 jobs in the government. In the first 6 months of Barack Obama, he added 60,000 government jobs. And Trump has now cut 11,000. So it's a complete 180 from what the prior two administrations have done.
Exactly what us on the right want to be seeing. Really good stuff coming out there, some winning. Let's get into another thing that's actually being kind of cut back, which plays into this we were just talking about, is a lot of the stuff in HUD is being cut back from Obama-era policies that have been deemed illegal pertaining to Section 8 housing grant schemes. You got some specifics for us on that, Bobby?
I do. So the Department of Housing and Urban Development is going to reverse the Obama administration's policy to return to a competitive bidding process to award Section 8 housing. And this is actually overturning the Obama-era methodology, which used a grant-style process that was actually rebuked by other administrations and was actually ultimately rebuked by the United States Supreme Court as well. Yet it continued. So that's why it was actually an illegal policy that went on. But now by having a bidding process, that's one of those things that, when people talk about free markets and competition, bidding is competition. It's the purest form of competition. And when you're bidding, you're keeping your price. You're not bidding for the highest price. You're bidding for the lowest price when it comes to Section 8 housing. So in a way, this is good for the government, or at least good for the people, because it keeps the cost down for them.
Yeah, and it also just pushes this, desire for increased benefit that can be offered to the government through competitive action. These companies need to offer something as far as housing that is not only cheaper and is not only more accountable in the sense that, your, money can be taken from you if you're not up to our standard. They just in general want to say, I am better than the other companies competing for this. I will give you this, and this more per, the dollars that you're giving me.
And not only that, but you have to just, remember what the housing grant scheme actually is. Well, what Section 8 in a way is. The government pays, landowners to rent out to low-income families and low-income people. And so that's taxpayer money. And in a way, by doing this, you are saving taxpayer money, which plays directly into what we were saying before about spending being down and just, waste and fraud that goes on with when the government spends a bunch of taxpayer money. By doing this, you're saving the taxpayers' money. So it's good.
And getting into some of the illegal stuff that was happening under, President Obama, the standard of HUD was actually decreasing because the money was just guaranteed to the individuals receiving this money, as opposed to not being a guarantee under the competitive policies that we're trying to undertake at the moment. It's not really a downgrading the amount that we're giving to HUD, but it's just trying to be more responsible about how we allocate this money. I believe it is maybe a slight cut, but it is not as drastic as anyone tries to make it out.
And if you remember back, Ben Carson, when he was put in charge of HUD, he found $500 billion worth of, wasted money in HUD. So I'm sure, I'm not going to say this was actually part of that, but it does relate to that in the terms that, HUD's changing to the point where they're trying to save money and reduce waste.
Yeah, HUD took on kind of the aspect under the Obama administration of like a soft slush fund that was able to, hide this money under the guise of doing something great, but just benefiting themselves in such a corrupt way as, we can see what was exposed by Ben Carson. And he really is turning around a lot of stuff that we do there. And, it's not so apparent how HUD plays into every single person's day-to-day life, but the reform that we are seeing does have an important impact on generally, I believe it's around 40 million people that use some sort of HUD service.
Yeah. So that's not a small number. We're talking about a lot there.
Any other statements on this you want to get, or should we get into some economic stuff?
I think that this is a good segue to get into the economic stuff.
Okay. The first thing we have out of the economy we want to touch on is this new Foxconn investment coming to Michigan to create a new plant. Do you have some specifics you want to get into that for us?
Yeah, so if you remember, we were talking last week about how Foxconn confirmed that they were building a plant in Wisconsin. Well, now they said they're also going to build a second plant in Michigan. And this was one of those things that was kind of, slightly unexpected for a lot of people. But just goes to show you, how jobs, especially manufacturing, are flying back to this country since Trump got elected. But if you remember back when Foxconn was trying to decide what state to build the plant in, they had like 7 or so states that were finalists. And then they decided to go with Wisconsin. Well, Michigan was one of those other states. And so by doing this, again, you're fulfilling more campaign promises. Trump can then, when he's running for re-election in 2020, he can stand in front of that plant in Michigan. He can stand in front of that plant in Wisconsin and say, look what I've done for you. Look what we were able to, get back to this country that otherwise would not have come here. So, I'm not just going to say it's good for only, Trump. But it's great because that's billions of dollars that are going to be added to the economy of Michigan simply because they have this plant there.
Yeah, billions of dollars, multi-billions is what they've said. Wisconsin Foxconn has promised to spend $10 billion on the new facilities that they're implementing in Wisconsin. I believe it's around the Waukesha area. I'm a Wisconsinite originally. It's generally in that southeast pocket of Wisconsin. They want to put this new plant. No word on where they want to put the plant in Michigan at the moment.
Yeah, we don't know the exact area in Michigan, but we do know is where is the Wisconsin plant is going to be building like LCD screens for phones. The Michigan plant's going to be working more on autonomous vehicles. Yeah.
So very interesting stuff. The Midwest is a very economically depressed area of the country. Post Obama, we have Illinois that's crazy default mode with how their budget's gone, but Wisconsin and Michigan are picking up at the moment, so that's a good chance for us to retain the presidency in 2020 with initiatives like this that we're seeing from all these investments coming from international corporations back in this country, and that has a lot to do with how Donald Trump is encouraging the economic growth in these areas in particular.
And not only that, if you want to get into the next story that we're talking about, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about just before this, about cutting the size and scope of government. There's a report out now from the U.S. Department of Agriculture on food stamp enrollment. And they said that more than 1.1 million Americans have dropped off the food stamp rolls since President Trump has taken office, which is a decrease of 2.79%. And, that doesn't seem like that's very high. But, 1 million people less are now on food stamps. And food stamps is one of those programs where you don't want people to be on it for their entire life. You don't want them to be on it long term. It's a type of program that you want it to be a short term, we're going to give you a little boost so that you can be on your way, just to get you back on your feet and going again. And under the Obama administration, we saw added, what was it? We got it from like 40 to almost 50 billion, or not billion, 50 million people on it. It was something like an increase of
a couple million.
It was an increase
I can
of
guarantee.
Like 10 or so million people over the course of his presidency got added to food stamp rolls. So now 1 million have dropped off. And, there's various reasons for that. Number one, the economy is improving. So naturally, you need less people on it. Number two,
some people are, improving their life circumstance. They just don't need it.
Yeah. And number two, there is a lot of states that are starting to look at making people have to work in order to earn food stamps, which
Alabama, I believe, was one, or was it Georgia?
Georgia
Wisconsin as well.
Yeah, so that does scare some people off the program.
But
the whole point of that is, if you pass that law and people have to get jobs in order to be on food stamps, and then they make enough money at the job where they don't need the food stamps. So in a way, it also makes sense. And so by doing this, the food stamp participation has now dropped to its lowest level since 2010. which also shows you that this trend is continuing.
And another thing that can be attributed to this number of the drops that Donald Trump has had a pretty big influence on is, Donald Trump's immigration rhetoric to get, immigrants off of the government dole. He wants to put that ban for 5 years on even legal immigrants getting any sort of welfare benefits when they come here. That also goes into the RISE Act, which we're going to touch on next in immigration, actually. But, another thing is also just, there are illegal aliens on government programs in some senses. Or, their anchor baby child where they get a lot of their welfare services from. And both from legal and illegal aliens, there's fear that, using those services will get them deported. So they're just getting off this stuff. So I just think this stuff is good because, we're not spending so much tax dollars on a program that is more in reliance of a weak economy, and the economy is turning around, so it's just more prosperity for the nation in general.
Exactly. And Trump, in his most recent budget, or at least in his 2018 budget proposal, he suggested that states match up to 20% of the federal money that's allotted for food stamps. And he's also proposed cuts for the SNAP program, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which pretty much, is food stamps. So not only has he suggested cuts from the federal government, he suggests that the states themselves work to pay for it more as well. So in a way, this is saving more taxpayer money at the federal level, which, as we've just said, is kind of continuing that trend that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I don't have any other things I really want to talk about on the subject. You want to go into immigration?
Yeah, let's get into immigration.
Open the door! Immigration!
La migra, vamos, niños!
This week in immigration.
Okay, immigration, we have a ton of stuff this week. A lot of really interesting stuff happening all across the country. A lot of movement we've been seeing this week. No really particular order we want to go in on this stuff, but let's just go with the first thing we have here, which is a woman from Peru was deported for committing voter fraud. You got some specifics on that, Bobby, for us?
I do. So the woman's name was Margarita Fitzpatrick, and she got deported earlier this year, and I believe she lived in Kansas, because when she got deported, she flew out of the Kansas City airport. But what pretty much happened was she left Peru in 2001 and came to the U.S. With her 3 daughters. She learned English. She tried to be a medical translator. And she even applied for an Illinois driver's license in 2005 and used her Peruvian passport and her green card. But she also declined to register to vote.
Initially.
Yeah, which I guess that was the entire thing that started the situation. But
the thing was, though, she got asked later on.
The clerk asked her if she wanted to register to vote. The clerk said that if she was supposed to, she asked the clerk if she was supposed to. The clerk said, well, that's up to you to do that or not. But the thing is, non-citizens should not be asked to do that. Non-citizens are not allowed to vote. They shouldn't be asked to register to vote. But so on the form, she checked the yes box next to, are you a U.S. citizen? And she thought that was the closest thing to her status, which was a legal permanent
correct.
resident, but not actually a citizen, because she had to vote the green card. And then she voted in 2 elections. I don't think it actually says which 2 elections those were, but that being said, she did vote in 2 elections. She claims it was just for local school board candidates since her kids were in school, but I mean, there's no real way for us to know which elections those actually ended up being. But, that being said, those are illegal votes. She's not a U.S. citizen. She never should have been able to register to vote. And because of that, once it was discovered that she committed voter fraud and was an illegal immigrant in this country, she's gone now. She got deported.
Yes. The kind of stuff I want to be seeing. I mean, voter fraud is a very serious thing. It's undermining the politics of this nation. And I'm sorry. I mean, you're not supposed to be here. You get to go back. We're going to get in some talk pretty soon here on the cost of deportation against giving people some sort of amnesty to stay here. And it's just not viable to keep every single person here just because it's a sad case. They have a family here or something.
Yeah.
Any other statements on that you want to make, or want to move on to this Senator Flake stuff?
Yeah, we might as well move on.
So, Senator Jeff Flake out of Arizona, not an individual we really care about at all, and his approval rating's not doing very well either.
If I had to endorse anyone, I'd endorse whoever's running against him. In the
Kelly Ward
primary.
is probably the top one.
People, but whoever ends up being the most likely person to upset him, which, like you said, yeah, that's probably going to end up being Kelly Ward. We talked about this on our midweek episode talking about the 2018 midterm elections preview, which we did a couple of weeks ago.
Which was pretty well received, I've seen.
It was very well received.
Pretty good download numbers.
Especially for the midweek episodes, which tend to be slightly smaller than the regular episodes. But it did very well. But in that, we talked about the GOP Senator Jeff Flake from Arizona. He's now promising to fight Trump's immigration legislation.
The RAISE Act in particular.
Yeah, the RAISE Act. He said he would, quote, stand up against the Immigration Act that was endorsed by President Trump. And he said, in his quote that he released in the statement, he actually said he thinks it's fine that we move towards a point system because that was what happened in a bipartisan bill that was introduced in the Senate previously, which he liked. But his biggest issue was the fact that he didn't want to cut legal immigration in half over the next decade. And, we've looked at polling data, and we talked about this last week, where like 60% of the country, even Democrats, want to cut legal immigration.
It was said it was a survey where people don't disclose who they are at all, so they can truly speak their mind. Around 60% of the people in this nation want no legal or illegal immigration at all. Yeah. That's probably why your numbers are doing a little bad here, Jeff Flake, at the moment. Me and you both are pretty in the camp of we want legal immigration to go down a bit as well. We've seen such a massive influx. If you look at the history of the United States, you need time periods for people to assimilate. Otherwise, people are just more at odds with each other. And it is, immigration can have a big effect on just how much the government spends on people. People that, they don't have a responsibility to provide for, as opposed to American citizens. Especially illegal immigration, but legal immigration as well. They have a much higher participation on social programs than the native population. The native population only uses around 30%. It's around half of legal immigrants use social programs, and that's what we're trying to end. I think it's just outrageous that he has this stance.
Yeah, not only that, but he said this is just not the direction to go if we're going to solve the problems in a conservative way that we need to. So I'll stand up every time to the president when he's doing things that I don't think he should be doing.
This is not your party anymore, Jeff Flake. This is not GOP as usual. Fighting wars all across the world and letting in unfettered immigration. That's not what this country is about, and that's not what the Republican Party needs to have success in this country and make changes for the good. So, hopefully you lose your seat in the Senate in the primaries.
I certainly do, because, Kelly Ward, she seems to be pretty pro-Trump, I believe.
Pretty popular. From what I've seen about her. She was the challenger against McCain in 2016.
Any Republican that's willing to stand up against McCain and then stand up against Flake, they've got my support for whatever amount of, for whatever that ends up meaning. But yeah, I hope Flake loses to her in the primary. Definitely.
Let's get into this construction wages we're seeing increasing because of the decline in illegal alien workers. You want to give us some specifics on that, Bobby?
I do. So there's a new report that was released by Fox News, actually. And they reported that Texas construction companies are actually now admitting that Trump's increased enforcement of immigration is forcing them to pay higher wages to the U.S. construction workers. So, this is one of the arguments that our side uses a lot when it comes to immigration, is how, illegal immigration in general, but especially illegal immigration, it drives down wages because people are willing to work for less. So that hurts the U.S. workers as well because on average your wages are going to get driven down. But now that President Trump's cracking down on immigration, the companies are now even admitting now that they're not even being forced. They're pretty much being forced to pay higher wages to the U.S. workers. But there was a guy by the name of Stan Marek. He's the CEO of Marek Construction in Texas. He says, half of the workers in construction in Texas are undocumented. We do hear that there are a lot of undocumented workers that are leaving the state, going to other states that don't have anti-immigration sentiment, and many of them are going back to Mexico. So he just admitted there that half of immigration workers in Texas are, illegal immigrants to this country. And they're leaving in very large numbers, whether they're being deported or they're self-deporting to either other areas of the country or back to their country of origin. So that's very good because of the fact that means U.S. wages for construction workers are beginning to rise.
And if you look at wages in this country, in the last 40 years, we haven't seen the average wages of American workers increase, at all. But we're seeing, the cost of living in this country rise so much, around 20% for that 40-year time period. I believe it is 20-25%. So this is something that is very much needed just so that we can have the survival of the American middle class, because it has taken, a big hit. And this is a implemented policy that we need with our immigration here to really sustain the middle class with jobs that, do uplift people.
Yeah.
Construction jobs can make, steady family wages, especially when we're seeing the wages rise. So definitely some great stuff, and pretty attributable to what Donald Trump's been able to do.
That took the words right out of my mouth. So,
anything else you want to say? Or should we get into this pretty big thing we got?
The only last thing I would say on that is the company said that the only downside to this is that because they're having to pay their U.S. workers more, it's actually causing their construction costs to go up, some as high as 30%. So that means the housing prices
are going up.
Are also going up as well.
Which, not the best, but American homeownership is pretty wishy-washy.
It's very saturated.
Yeah.
At this point, so.
Not the best news in that sense, but it's going to happen. The next thing we want to get into is actually this pretty big report that we have here from an immigration policy think tank, I believe it was, that did this report on the cost of amnesty, which would cost, from their calculations, almost 6 times more than if we were to deport all illegal aliens in this nation. Bobby, you want to go into some details for that?
I do. So this report was released by the Center for Immigration Studies, which is abbreviated by CIS. And what they did was they said that the price for American taxpayers is $10,854 per illegal alien removed, compared to the average lifetime net fiscal drain of $65,292. Pretty much what they did was they looked at the cost. They said the fiscal cost created by illegal immigrants of $746.3 billion compares to a total cost of deportations of $124.1 billion, which is assuming a fiscal year 2016 cost of deportation. Assuming a 2016 cost per deportation, which is also $67.6 billion using the fiscal year 2012 deportation costs. So because of the fact that deportations are rising, teeny tiny bit during Obama's last year, but a whole lot during Trump's administration so far, you can just pretty much look at that if you divide that by the number of taxpayers, the average taxpayer is going to pay about $11,000 per illegal alien removed, which, that seems like that's a lot of money just to deport one person. But when you look at that, the lifetime net fiscal drain is $65,000, $65,000 per family. Obviously, anyone would want to, pay less and not have to pay more.
Yeah, and you get these people on the right and the left that say, oh, we just need amnesty in general because you can't afford to do all these deportations that, Donald Trump has called for. But really, when you look at it in this sense, we can't afford to give something like that. We can't afford not to have deportations like Donald Trump has called for. I got into some arguments with people during the primaries around my support for Donald Trump, and I was, talking with people that wanted Marco Rubio to be the candidate, a couple people that supported Rubio, some people that supported Carla Fiorina, that were calling for amnesties, thinking that it would benefit the GOP and just be cheaper. But, these people are going to vote against you if you give these amnesties. It's been recorded in studies from Pew Research, which we've gone over on this program many a time. The new immigrants coming to this country that are, allowed to vote for bigger government around the lines of 8-2. And this is something that sustains for generations, still 7-3, usually 3 generations down the line. So it makes sense because they use, welfare benefits more than most people. They're not paying into a system their entire life. They're receiving immediately once they get on the government dole. So, yeah, some pretty startling statistics to look at, I believe.
Yeah, and the very last thing that I have to say about that is the director of research for CIS is Dr. Stephen A. Camarota. And he said, if you think about this, deporting a large share of illegal immigrants can now be justified from a fiscal point of view when you look at the data. So if you're someone who's wanting to just, have the government spend the least amount of money that you can tell them, hey, deporting illegal immigrants, that's what saves the country money. And they now have the data to back that up.
Yeah, let's get into the next stuff that we have here, which is in regards to some deportations we've been seeing this year under Donald Trump. Looking at deportations since Trump's come into office, deportation orders and self-removals are up around 30%. You want to go into specifics for us, Bobby?
Yes, I do. So the statistics show that there were just under 50,000 orders from immigration judges to remove illegal immigrants between February 1st and July 31st, and an additional just over 7,000 illegal immigrants have agreed to leave the country voluntary. And, if you think, so if you do the math for that comparing to last year, that's about a 31 or so % increase. So right about a third increase from Obama's same period from 2016. Now, that also compares to what we have in terms of total deportations from last year alone. And that report shows that in the first 6 months of the Trump administration, deportation orders are now up 27.8% from last year. And that is from the Department of Justice's Executive Office of Immigration Review. So, in general, the amount of actual physical deportations that have happened, plus the amount of people that have been ordered to be deported who haven't actually been deported yet, plus the people who have decided to self-deport who are already being ordered to deport, you're up over a third more than President Obama's years from the same period. And it's only going to continue.
And likely rise.
Yeah, and likely rise, especially as, ICE has been just deporting a lot of people. And it seems like that's one of the few things that Trump has been extremely successful on. Is
which they don't talk about because they don't want it to show that he's successful.
Yeah,
the media.
And I mean, I'll admit there are several things that Trump has not been successful at all on yet. But one thing he's been, hands down, no argument is immigration, especially deportation.
Which deportation, a lot of this has to do with Thomas Homan, at the head of ICE, which he's a holder for the Obama administration, but Donald Trump has really, unrestrained him to. He's allowed to, under, Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice declarative statements they've been making, every single person that's an illegal alien is up for deportation. And, this Thomas Homan guy, he loves having the reins free on him. He's saying, yeah, we're going to try and beat the records that Obama set under his administration. Good guy that we have in there doing stuff that we want to be seeing. And Donald Trump's doing well, and this is likely only to ramp up as we start seeing some more wins against these sanctuary cities, I believe. And that is, a big factor that's holding us back. But ICE has been upping, targeting deportations in sanctuary cities. They're not afraid to do this stuff.
Yeah, and speaking of ICE targeting people in sanctuary cities, the next article that we have is ICE officers on Long Island launched Operation Soar, in which they arrested 32 sex offenders on Long Island during a 10-day undertaking. So it started on August 3rd, and it went through August 13th, which was, I guess today would be the end of it. But, I'm sorry, it ended on August 3rd, so it started, the last week of July. But they wanted to eradicate foreign nationals who were sex offenders living in the Nassau and Suffolk County areas of Long Island, according to an ICE press release. And they said that they arrested 32 people, of which the 12 were the registered sex offenders. And so, as we said, we're not just going after your average everyday illegal immigrant. We're going after the real bad guys first. And like we said, as we continue to score more victories against sanctuary cities, you'll be able to deport more people as well. But in the meantime, they're going after the people who really shouldn't be here, especially the ones that are, registered sex offenders.
Which you look at, we have had some successes against cities. There was an article I saw this week. We don't have it up here. But Miami was one of the first cities to relent sanctuary city status. Columbus, Ohio was one as well. I forget where this came out of this article, but they've been seeing some successes in their ramping up of deportations in Miami, and they have seen a decrease in crime for doing these initiatives. So they are making these communities safer. And this is stuff that's popular in the general public, reducing crime, having strong pro-police policies like Donald Trump has said with his rhetoric through the campaign. And, I believe he's generally done some pretty good things for the, police department since he's come into his administration. And generally, police officers do approve of Donald Trump's administration. I mean, I can speak for the numbers I know nearby in Austin. 85% of the police officers there voted for Donald Trump, He's a very popular guy amongst these people because they don't feel like the threat of the government intrusion at the federal level into localities that we were seeing under Obama. Donald Trump's just not doing that at the moment. So, pretty good stuff I think we're seeing from the administration in that aspect. Any other things you want to say or no?
Let's move on to the next thing.
Okay, this is some numbers we have on polling for the RAISE Act, which, that came out only last week at this point.
You skipped an article, actually.
Oh, yes. Let's get into this number as well. That's actually related to the ICE stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
We have some numbers out of the Washington Examiner on the percentage of the American federal prison population that are illegal aliens.
Yeah, so this was actually, it was published by the Washington Examiner, but it was sourced from a new Homeland Security report. It shows that 23% of all federal prisoners are illegal immigrants. Think about that. 23%.
That we're providing for.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that, they said that the Justice Department's Bureau of Prisons, fulfilling a presidential executive order requiring transparency on prisoner immigration status, said it houses 187,855 inmates, of which 42,034 are foreign-born. Now, it said that of those 42,034, it said that of those 42,034, only 7 of them have been granted deportation relief, meaning that they're not going to deport them. So you potentially have pretty much 42,000 federal inmates, all of which are, foreign-born, which you can deport, which is good. And Homeland Security also said that the U.S. Marshal Service has a similar breakdown in its cells. They said that of the 50,135 people they've detained, just over 12,000 have said that they are illegal immigrants. So, that's also astounding when you think about those.
When they always say, illegal aliens don't commit crime, they don't commit crime, but they're 23% of your federal prison population. I think there's a little, a little deception that we're seeing with the numbers, which they always claim on, they don't do this stuff. And, this is money that we're spending on people that we don't have a duty to, that have aggressed against American citizens, and we're taking American citizens' dollars and spending it on them. Vastly unjust.
Not only that, but, a lot of people like to complain about the U.S. incarceration system. and talk about how big it is, or how they don't like.
Biggest in the globe.
Yeah, biggest in the globe. 23% of federal inmates are foreign born. Those are people who don't need to be here. Imagine what would happen if you cut the number of people by 23%. I understand, there are going to be variable costs and fixed costs as well. You can start cutting the size of the U.S. incarceration system. You can start getting that rate down just by deporting the people who are already arrested, who are the foreign-born people. So,
which a hard part against the sanctuary cities in regards to this is, ICE will put out detainer notices on these illegal aliens just so they can get them into custody when they're released from prison, and these prisons do not cooperate and just let them back out on the street. That's not safe for the general public. That's not what we want.
Yeah. And
I don't see how that benefits people. But they say that these sanctuary cities are better because they're sanctuary cities with crime. But they're just letting these people out back on the streets.
Well, what's good about this is, like we said, only 7 of those have actually been granted relief from deportation. But of the 42,000 that the DHS report said, 47% of those have received their final orders for removal. So at least 47% of those, which is about 19,700, they're going back.
And that's a decent number.
Now, 50.2% are aliens who are currently under ICE investigation for possible removal, which is about 21,000 or so. So not only do we have 19,700 who for sure are going to go back, you've got another 21,100 who have a strong possibility of going back once ICE finishes their individual investigations into each case.
Yeah. I don't have any other things on this if you want to go into the RAISE Act stuff.
I think that we should go into the RAISE Act stuff.
Okay, so we got some polling numbers on American support for the RAISE Act, which are pretty promising. The RAISE Act came out last week. That's the point-based initiative by Tom Cotton and David Perdue. David Perdue, we've actually seen speak in person. That would give us a very beneficial point-based system that would, have immigration that is America first, which we haven't had since prior to 1965, prior to the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. And generally, Americans support this. You got the specifics on that?
I do. So this was a new poll that was conducted by the Morning Consult and Politico. So not exactly, right-wing pollsters.
No.
But as we've said before, there's widespread support, even among liberals, for limiting U.S. immigration. But the survey found that 44% of voters said they supported the RAISE Act that President Trump introduced along with Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas and Senator David Perdue of Georgia. But what's interesting is only about 30% said they opposed it. So you've already got at least a plus 14 in terms of support or non-support of the entire bill in general. But when they actually went on and they looked at the various factors inside the RAISE Act, it gets even better. Now, the most popular provision from the bill is the point system, where where immigrants would be awarded points based on a criteria such as education or English language ability or their prospective salary. That that provision alone to award points, 61% approval according to that poll. 61%. It was also followed by 59% of voters who supported limiting the number of refugees that the U.S. offers permanent residency. So they said that the least popular idea was actually the one that wanted to reduce the number of legal immigrants allowed in the U.S. By half over the next decade. Only 39%. Only 39% opposed that idea, but 48% still supported it. So you still have at least about a +9 there for people who are wanting to cut the number of immigrants to the U.S. by half in the next 10 years. So individually, people like those policies. In general, people like the RAISE Act as well. So that almost completely destroys the left's narrative. And when you break it down by party-wise, this is where it kind of gets interesting, where Democrats actually oppose the plan 49-28. But Republicans support it about 70%. Only 11% oppose it. So it does appear, if you do that math, there's actually a lot of people who are just unsure whether or not they support it or not. And I think that's the reason.
Or don't want to say.
Yeah, or don't want to say. And I think that's the reason why people are okay with saying that they support individual policies within the bill. But when it comes to the bill itself, you notice, everything is around 60% of each individual policy they liked. But the bill itself, only 44%, doesn't really make sense. But when you consider that there's so many people who are undecided when it comes to each party, it does make perfect sense.
And, something about these polls we need to keep in mind is these viewpoints that we're seeing in these polls are something that are going to be articulated in the 2018 primaries and, midterms. People are going to vote for candidates that backed the RAISE Act. We just talked about Senator Jeff Flake, who we don't like so much, that, is against the RAISE Act. And that's hurting his approval numbers we're seeing right now. And I think as we get closer to the 2018 midterms, we're going to see support for things like the RAISE Act only increase, which is, stuff that we want to be seeing.
Yeah, and Jeff Flake's approval was what? I think it was 18% or something. It's
Yeah.
one of the lowest in Congress for a senator. So, I think he's going to be very difficult for him, especially to hold on to his seat, especially in the Republican primary. And I'm not sure how that's going to play out if he's able to survive the primary process. But
which he's gone. If he's gone, there's a better chance that we can get this passed.
Very much so.
Senate-wise, I think we could actually get the numbers in a Trumpian sense to get something like this passed, which would be immense. This would be a gigantic win for the United States.
Yeah, this would be the best comprehensive immigration reform since 1965.
Yeah.
Well overdue.
I don't have too much else to say about the RAISE Act. It has the Trump Republic radio endorsement, a bill that we love.
I'm not really sure what we're allowed to do in terms of endorsement, but we're putting our stamp of approval on that thing.
Let's get into some of this fraud that we're seeing in regards to illegal immigration.
I think you know more about this one than I do.
Yeah, let me pull it up. There's some stuff off Judicial Watch about in regards to some fraud that we've seen out of Massachusetts. There was a rise in illegal aliens using fake Puerto Rican birth certificates to obtain authentic U.S. passports and driver's license. And the feds that got busted in Massachusetts, they were running this ring where they would get cash payments from these illegal aliens to just give them these documents, which is insane. And there's been some arrests this week in regards to that, which, just points back to this general election integrity project, which Mike Pence has been working on. Just another example of things that we can point to, and so many things over the course of we've been doing this program that points to voter fraud is a big problem in this country, contrary to the narrative that the left pushes. Any thoughts, Bobby?
Well, I would, kind of give a little bit more information about the story. They said that there were 6 people total that were arrested in Massachusetts as part of this ring. They've all been charged with aggravated identity theft. The thing is, though, the only reason they're found out is because of an anonymous tip that was received by the Massachusetts State Police 2 years ago. Think about that, Enzo. They got a tip 2 years ago, just now arrested them. So, there's no telling how long the scheme's been operating before that, or to what depths it's been operating even since that. So, I would not be surprised if there's stuff like this happening all over the country. Because if it takes them 2 years after they get the tip in order to figure out whether or not they should arrest them or not and charge them, that's way too slow in my book.
Yeah, not good stuff, and it's a subversion of our political process. Let's get into some of the stuff that's happening at the Texas border, since this is always very relevant to us.
Especially, yeah.
The first one that we have here is recently, in a single instant, 86 Guatemalans were arrested at the Texas border. You have the specifics, Bobby?
I do. So, this happened in the Rio Grande Valley, which is just south of here. They said that in one day, in one sitting, there was a group of 86 illegal aliens that were arrested. They were all from Guatemala. But the Border Patrol also seized more than $1 million worth of marijuana. They also rescued one illegal alien who was lost in the brush. So, I mean, I guess we got to save those people as well. And they also recovered, it says, they recovered the remains of another migrant who was not as lucky. So I guess they didn't really find him walking in the brush. But that all happened on Monday. So, it's it's interesting that in one day alone, 86 Guatemalans arrested trying to sneak into the U.S. border. I the only thing I have to say about that is, if you're going to sneak across the U.S. border, now, why would you go in a group of 86 people?
Yeah, that seems dumb.
Like, you'd want to separate, spread out, try not to get caught. You got a group of 86 people crossing the border. I don't know how they did it. I don't know if they were walking. I don't know if they were in a truck. But, 86 people at one time, that's not a very smart idea at all. But they said they discovered it because there was an SUV that was driving at a high rate of speed at 1:30 in the morning near the town of Los Arrieros, Texas. They pursued the vehicle, which eventually crashed into a utility pole. The driver fled the scene, but that's how they discovered 75 bundles of marijuana, which weighed over 1,400 pounds, estimated $1 million on the market. So, So not only are they bringing their drugs, but they're also bringing 86 of them at one time. So.
And, as someone that lives in Texas and gets a feel for the public perception on these things that happen in our state, there's been a very strong crackdown on immigration since we saw that incident in San Antonio where, the illegal aliens died in that semi-truck. We're just not even risking this stuff. You may disagree, or agree with us on immigration, but there are humanitarian losses, as we just said with this incident, because people are coming. And that's one of the reasons why we need a wall, because people shouldn't have to be kind because they're coming here, because they just shouldn't be coming here. Any other things, or you want to move on?
Let's move on.
Okay, the next thing we also have here that is happening in our state of Texas is there's been some protests at the border. It was out of Mission, Texas. You want to go into that, Bobby?
Yeah, so they said there were several hundred protesters who on Saturday decided to go protest along the Rio Grande levee, where the Trump administration had said that that's where they want to start building part of their first phases of the wall down there in the Rio Grande Valley. They said that the protesters started, I believe, if I could find where it was. Yeah, they said the procession set out just after dawn from Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is it says it's a towering church in the border city of Mission. But Saenz, who was said early in the article, was Anthony Saenz. He's a 19-year-old native of the Rio Grande Valley. And he said that he's an altar servant at the Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. He was the one who was leading the group while burning smoky incense. And they decided just to, they left the church, they walked around the levee, and protested building the wall. So I'm not sure how much that's going to help them or not.
Yeah, which, we predicted some of this happening, especially as we're getting closer towards, building the wall. Progress is a little stalled at the moment, but we're still seeing some movement. But, as people that live in Texas, we've seen a lot of protests in regards to immigration happening in our state. A lot of the Capitol building especially. But, not exactly stuff we want to be seeing. I don't want it to get in the way of the building of the wall. But, Texas is a battleground on this immigration stuff. Abbott, who we have in governor, is definitely on our side, a ton. But, there's still a pretty big amount of people that are just 100% against the stuff Abbott's doing, which I love the stuff Abbott does, but
I would, the only thing I would say is I would suggest if someone wants to protest building the wall, I'd say wait till construction starts. Then go down to the protest, but stand on the south side and just keep standing there. And then when we finish the wall, you can stay on the south side. So.
You saw Governor Abbott recently, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I'll tell a quick story about that. So, earlier this week, the former governor of Texas, who I think his name was Mark White, he was the governor of Texas back in the 1980s. He was elected, I believe, in 82 and came into office in 83. I think he only served one term. but he was the governor of Texas back then. He passed away, I think it was either earlier this week or late last week. But he passed away, and my father had a friend in town, and his friend had never been to the Texas Capitol, so we decided to go to Austin, just so I could show them around since I know that area more than they do. So we went to the Texas Capitol, and there's a bunch of people with, like TV news cameras were all set up inside the rotunda there, and all the police were there kind of standing around, and we weren't really sure what was going on. But, the visitors, they were allowed just to keep walking around like normal. So we asked around. They said that the body of Governor White was going to be put in wake on the rotunda. If you've ever been to the Texas Capitol Rotunda, they have painted pictures of all the former governors on the lower level of the rotunda. And above his, they kind of had a black cloth that was sitting on it, almost like a curtain. And it was going to be his casket was going to be placed in front of that day in wake. And so they said there was going to be like a small ceremony. So we weren't sure who was going to be at the ceremony, but we thought, hey, it's only going to be like half an hour until this thing starts. So we walked around, and while we were there, Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick were both present in the ceremony. Now, I know that you and some of our other friends, you've all met Greg Abbott before.
Once I did, yes.
Or at least seen him in person. I was the only one who'd never actually even seen him in person, so I guess now I can say that, I was able to see him. I was standing on the second level of the rotunda looking down when it happened, so I was almost directly above them. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I've met Governor Greg Abbott once at a book signing in New Braunfels. I just got to shake his hand, take a photo, and I was like, I love the stuff you do, Governor Abbott. I can't wait to vote for you in 2018.
So yeah, I guess that's all really I had to say about that experience.
Yeah. Want to go in this last thing we have on immigration, then we can get in the bottom stack for the national news?
I do. So this is probably one of the best stories that we have so far. Now, there have been tips that led to the arrest of an MS-13 gang member who was on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. His name was Walter Giovanni Gomez, an illegal immigrant from Honduras. He was arrested on Friday in Woolbridge, which is south of Washington, which I guess is in, Woolbridge, Virginia, which is 20 miles south of Washington, D.C. The FBI received a bunch of tips that he was there, and they arrested him. So he goes by the nickname Cholo, which, I guess that's kind of interesting. But he's accused of killing a fellow MS-13 gang member, Julio Matute, back in 2011. And they said that after a long night of partying, he beat Matute with a baseball bat and stabbed him 17 times with a knife and then slit his throat with a screwdriver. So this is a very violent guy, and that's the reason why he made the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. But we got the new we got some really good news in the fact that he was finally arrested.
Yeah, which is a part of the greater war that Jeff Sessions has declared on MS-13. El Salvador is complaining we're deporting so many back to them. We're starting to see some good progress on that front. So definitely some things that we want to be seeing in immigration.
Yeah, I wanna read the quote that Trump said when he made his speech of cracking down on MS-13. He said, "They kidnap, they extort, they rape, and they rob. They stomp on their victims. They beat them with clubs. They slash them with machetes, and they stab them with knives. They have transformed peaceful parks and beautiful quiet neighborhoods into blood-stained killing fields. They are animals." So, we're going after MS-13. And the guy who was on the top 10 most wanted list by the FBI, he's arrested, and he's probably going to get deported. So I certainly hope that happens.
Good stuff, good stuff. Let's get into the bottom of the stack of the national news, then we can get into current year college craziness.
All right.
But the first thing that we want to talk about is what Mayor de Blasio has been up to in New York City with his new Tax the Rich initiative he wants to do to pay for subway repairs and subway subsidies. You want to touch on that, Bobby?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and touch on that. So he said that the subways weren't his responsibility, but now he wants to tax the wealthy in order to pay for everything. So Bill de Blasio on Sunday, and this was last Sunday, he unveiled a pitch to raise $800 million a year for mass transit by raising a tax by raising a nearly 14% tax on high-income earners living in New York City. The proposed city income tax hike would raise the rate for individuals making more than $500,000 and married couples earning more than $1 million from 3.87% to 4.41%. Now, if you think about it, $1 million for a couple sounds like a lot of money, but when you're in New York City,
It's not.
that's really not all that much money.
500,000 is definitely not so much there.
Especially for people that work, in Wall Street, that area, there's a lot of very high income earners down in that area. And New York City alone is a very, very expensive place to live. So it's not all that uncommon. So, you talk about, you're taxing the rich. You're taxing a lot of people in that city.
Very productive people.
Yeah. And, but, he released a statement saying, the top 1% can afford to do a little bit more, and they should. Because a transit system that works makes New York City's economy strong and benefits us all. Yeah, so it's terrible. But
And the laws that they want to pass are generally unconstitutional. The next thing that we're going to get into is what they've done in Seattle. You want to touch on that?
We'll go ahead and mention this. So a few weeks ago in the show, we were talking about how Seattle passed a tax the rich policy. Now, I believe it's in, was it the Washington's state constitution?
Yes.
Said that there couldn't be taxes like that raised.
They don't have an income tax there.
Yeah, and so that's why people thought that it was unconstitutional. Now, we covered that in detail a few weeks ago when we actually talked about it, but there's now been the first court filing that's been filed against it. So the lawsuit is filed by the Freedom Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, on behalf of 19 Seattle citizens, and they're saying it violates their state constitution, which, it does. But also another group called Opportunity for All Coalition, which was founded by venture capitalist Matt McElwain. He also filed a lawsuit against it that very same day. So, we knew that it was going to face legal issues, and it's finally starting to face those as well. So that's pretty much all we wanted to do, updating with that. It'll probably be a long time before this stuff actually goes through the court system, because that does take a long time. But
we don't like these communist policies.
Yeah, we definitely don't like these policies, and this is one of those ones that looked like it was going to get struck down. It was going to face a lot of backlash, and that's exactly what's happening. It's facing a lot of backlash.
Yeah. Nothing more to say about that, I think. Let's go into some of these poll numbers we have for Trump's approval rating we actually want to touch on. Now, as we said, at the beginning of the program, his approval rating is up since the North Korea comments, so you got to take the stuff that we're about to say with a grain of salt. But it's generally in regards to some declining base numbers, but I know you have some conflicts with these numbers.
Yeah, so there's an article here that was written in Axios, and it was talking about a poll that was done by the firm Firehouse Strategies, and it was looking at Trump's approval rating among his base in swing states of Florida, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Now, what it shows is that it divides his supporters. It divides his support into four main categories: strong, favorable, somewhat unfavorable, and strong, unfavorable. Now, they did a poll back in April, and they did a poll in August as well, just to see how things were doing. So his strong favorable numbers have dropped from 35.3 to 28.6, whereas his strong unfavorable numbers have increased from 36 to 43.6. Now, I went ahead and I did the math. If you add in the somewhat favorables as well, his total favorability has dropped from 44.5 to 41.9, which is a decrease of 2.6, whereas his unfavorability has increased from 42.5 to 51, which is an increase of 8.5. But the undecideds have gone from 13 to 7.1. So what that's really showing is that his total favorability has dropped by just a little bit, but the people who are undecided have been moving towards the more unfavorable side. And I mean, we both like Trump, but we've admitted he's not as popular as we'd like him to be, even though he's...
Policy-wise, he is. It's just him himself, usually. That's what it comes down to.
And like we said, when we were talking about the RAISE Act, the individual policies were showing 61% approval, 59% approval. But
the economy.
But the act itself is
has
showing,
a lot of people behind
44%
it.
approval. And you're absolutely right. The economy, there's a poll that showed 60% of people approve of Trump's handling of the economy. Even when I go back to, I keep mentioning the Syria strike, which even though we didn't like it, 57% of Americans agreed with it. They liked it. They thought it was a good idea. So his individual actions and policies have been met with favorability, whereas people just don't like him to begin with. But pretty much what this poll was showing was that, Trump's base in the swing states is shrinking. Now, like we said, this poll was done back in, it was released early August, but it was done back in July. So, this was before all the North Korea stuff has happened. This was before the information was released about the new Foxconn plant. So it pretty much just shows that he can't take those states for granted in 2020.
No.
Even though he won because of promises of increased economic prosperity, bringing back jobs, decreasing regulations, getting the Rust Belt back on track. You can't take that for granted just because you've been successful economically. You can't take for granted the fact that those people, you still need to go, you still need to rally behind them, you still need to get them out to vote in 2020 a second time, especially in 2018 for the midterms going after those. Now, what you had mentioned earlier, though, about my some issue that I have with these numbers is that they did this, like I said, in Florida, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Now, those are all the 4 swing states that they pulled these people in. They did about 2,900 interviews. However, half of those came from Florida alone. So what that's pretty much showing is that, Florida, although it's a swing state, it's not the same as the Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, right?
Yeah.
And those seem to be the states where everything's improving more. Whereas Florida, even though it went to Trump, it's pretty much in the same spot that it was 6 months ago. Whereas Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio have all seen improvements within the last 6 months. So I have a feeling that if they were to split that poll more evenly among the swing states that have shown more or have been, have seen better days now since Trump's been elected, I have a feeling that some of those numbers might be a little bit different. You'd probably still see a lot of unfavorability movement from the undecideds, but in terms of the favorable numbers, it would probably be slightly higher than what the poll's actually showing. It's skewed more towards Florida, not towards the Rust Belt states.
And it's so important that we maintain this base and we continue to satisfy this base that voted for Trump in these states, because it's still very close in a lot of these states. Wisconsin's still a very close state. Pennsylvania's still a very close state. Florida's an extremely close state. We got that pretty narrowly. We got a lot of these places very narrowly.
Yeah, Ohio is the only one that wasn't
as
we
close.
won that by 9 points.
Yeah.
That was a huge victory for us.
And, all these states we have seen, Republican Party voter registration higher than the Democrats, but we still can't take this stuff for granted.
Yeah, so, like we said, just don't take it for granted. Keep listening to your base, keep appealing to your base, keep doing things the base will like, and they will reward you for that. So it seems like they've been rewarded, or not they, but it seems like, they've been getting some of what they asked for, but, again, as you said, as I said, don't take it for granted. That's the point.
Yeah. Let's go into one of the states that we are watching very closely for the 2018 midterms, and that is Michigan, because, the Kid Rock challenge against Dabanow. You want to get into that, Bobby?
I do. So the president of the Senate Leadership Fund, his name is Stephen Law. He made the revelation when he was asked about Kid Rock running for Senate, and he said we'd be actually very interested in his candidacy. He said, even though there's a poll that shows he was losing to Stabenow by 8 points, he hasn't even declared he's running yet. He's only down by 8 points in a state that went to Trump, and a state that's seeing increased economic prosperity. You get a guy like Kid Rock, who is pro-Trump, into that seat, and there's a very good chance you could win it. We covered that in our 2018 midterm preview. But now you have a guy who's the president of the Senate Leadership Fund, has now came out and said that, he's supportive and he's interested in actually seeing you run. So, I don't know if you want to say that's a complete endorsement per se, but, it's not like they're saying, no, we don't want this person to run. We don't think it's a good idea. No, they're very interested. They want to see him run. They want him to do it. And I want him to do it too. So the statement he said was, he hasn't stayed this long in the business that he's been in by actually living life that he looks like he lives when he's on stage. So I certainly wouldn't count him out. We'd be pretty interested in his candidacy. And then he looked into the camera directly and he said, so if you're watching, Kid Rock, we hope you run. So, you got now support from inside the Senate, pretty much, is the point of this story.
Which is one of these seats that we have a pretty good chance of winning. And I mean, the population of Michigan, I would say in general, wants to see someone that can get behind Donald Trump's policies that he's proposing at the moment. I mean, there's a good chance that we could see this. I don't know. Still kind of far out to call when they're going to vote. It's like a year from now, but still.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where that goes. So
we got some Hillary Clinton news.
Yeah, 2 articles on Hillary Clinton, neither of which I'm happy about. Well,
yeah. But the first one is the humorous one.
Yeah.
So Hillary Clinton, lady that we don't like so much, is considering giving up politics for a career in preaching the gospel. You got some of the stuff on this, Bobby?
Unfortunately, I've got the stuff on this. So apparently, Clinton, according to her pastor, Reverend Bill Shalati, who actually wrote a book about Hillary Clinton's spiritual life. I'm not sure if that's, that sounds kind of like a contradiction. But he wrote a book, and he said that she wants to preach. So during a promotional photo shoot for the, quote, Strong for a Moment Like This, the Daily Devotions of Hillary Rodham Clinton, which I guess was the actual book, they said a year's worth of devotions were tailored for Clinton as she campaigned for president. And she told Shalati that she would like to seek spiritual leadership to be part of her career. Now, when it came to her desire to be a pastor, he said, "It will make me seem much too pious," she told him. But yeah, it's kind of a weird story. The media says that she's been wanting to preach, even though her pastor's kind of iffy on it. Is pretty much the whole point of what I've been saying. I'm kind of just going on a rant right now, but yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say.
I think the weird thing to keep in mind while she's talking about this is she also has that super PAC she just started for the Democrats, to fund Democrat initiatives. So she wants to be a preacher while taking on political activism. That doesn't really sound the best to say that you just want to have an inclusive church environment so much to me. And you look at this woman's statements during the general election calling a big portion of the population deplorable and unredeemable. Is she gonna think that they're unredeemable in the church while she's preaching? I don't know. I don't really care. I don't care to judge so much in religious aspects, but it's interesting, I guess.
I was gonna say, something tells me that you're evangelical Christians who vote heavily Republican.
I voted for Trump.
Something tells me they're not exactly going to be flocking to that church to see her preach.
Or buying this book.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how successful she's going to do on that.
Let's get into the more garbage news that we have in regards to Hillary Clinton, though. So the Justice Department this week has offered Hillary Clinton a plea deal.
Yep. So the Justice Department has reopened the investigation of Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified material on her private email system while she was Secretary of State, and is considering offering her a plea bargain if she will agree to plead guilty to charges of breaking the law, according to her attorney. Now, there's a long statement that they released. I'm not going to read everything. But the Clinton attorney cautioned that normally a plea deal is offered by a prosecutor only upon arrangement, and Hillary has not yet been charged with any crime. Yet she's still been offered a plea deal, even though she hasn't been charged with the crime. So that really makes you wonder, why was she offered a plea deal if she wasn't charged with a crime?
Yeah, that makes no sense.
But, yeah, it said under the Justice Department's plea offer, Hillary would be required to sign a document admitting that she committed a prosecutable crime. In return, the Department of Justice would agree not to bring charges against her in connection with the email probe. That pretty much kills the email probe. The whole point of it is to figure out, hey, you
What
did
happened
something
there?
illegal. You need to be locked up. Lock her up. But if she admits to her, this is literally saying, admit that you did nothing wrong and you won't be punished. Otherwise, we're gonna punish you? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So, I don't understand.
Yeah, it's clown world, but she's such, a powerful individual. I don't think we could have ever expected her to get prosecuted as sad as it is. We have another, actually, Clinton thing happening here, actually.
Yeah.
There was a judge that ordered from the State Department to review Clinton's Benghazi emails. So, as we offer this plea deal, we're looking deeper into stuff still related to Hillary Clinton, so it's kind of crazy. There's no, direction in how they want to approach this.
Yeah, so, this one came from Judge Mehta. I believe that's how you pronounce the name. It's Mehta. He's a D.C. District Court judge. He ordered the State Department to search the state.gov email accounts of Huma Abedin, Cheryl Mills, and Jacob Sullivan, who are former aides of Hillary Clinton during her tenure as Secretary of State. They said the State Department is ordered to search in those accounts for records responsive to the March 2015 Freedom of Information Act request that was, put in by Judicial Watch. And that all had to do with her Benghazi email scandal that went along there. So, there's a lot to this story, but that's pretty much what it comes down to is that, Benghazi, it's not over yet. We're still looking into it. We're still searching her advisors' emails, and hopefully they find something so that people can be prosecuted in that.
Yeah. I'm not the best on what happened in Benghazi, but, it's good just to look into this stuff, even though I don't think anything will happen.
Yeah, I don't think anything's really going to happen in either of those cases that we were talking about, but, it's good news and it's bad news, so what are you going to do?
Yeah, let's get into this thing that happened out of Baltimore, which is kind of, I guess, funny, but also sad. There was activists over the weekend that were calling for a ceasefire weekend because, the violence in Baltimore is so bad at the moment. And they held all these things thinking that they could, promote love and whatnot and, it'll be all okay. But, some people still got shot.
Yeah, so according to the Baltimore Sun, they said that the Baltimore Mayor, Catherine Pugh, and the city's police department, they promoted the ceasefire with one simple message: nobody kill anybody. And, a city like Baltimore, that's not going to work. And, there was still a couple of shootings, including a 24-year-old man who was shot and killed in central Baltimore last Saturday, while a 37-year-old man was murdered Saturday night in Baltimore. And there's also a couple other non-fatal shootings that occurred. But T.J. Smith, who is a Baltimore Police Department spokesman, he said, yes, there was a homicide, but the work doesn't stop. Organizers called and are in the area to continue to spread love. Well, you're not exactly spreading love if you're shooting people to death. But they said the problem is actually so bad that, in fact, Baltimore has already seen 40 more murders through 2017 than all of New York City has seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's significantly smaller.
Significantly smaller. Maybe that's because,
I've been to Baltimore once. It's not that great.
Maybe that's because New York City's, they're wasting all their time and effort trying to, tax the rich to pay for the subway instead of
and protect the illegal
instead of
aliens.
telling them to not kill each other. Yeah, it says Baltimore actually has less than 10% of the population of New York City. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, Baltimore, they just seem very soft on crime out there, which is not good. Remember during the Baltimore riots, the mayor of Baltimore said that they needed to give protesters that wanted to destroy space to destroy. That's outrageous. Well, that's strangely like ideologically driven by the stuff that the left pushes. So it's pretty ridiculous, and they're not taking care of their citizens.
And you know what I think is the absolute funniest part of this story? Is that even though they tried to do this for just one weekend and it failed, they said they plan to eventually attempt a year-long ceasefire.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. You're one of the highest crime rate cities in the country. You can't just say, stop killing everyone and expect people to follow the rules. Not going to happen.
Yeah, let's get into the stuff that we have next, though.
Yeah, so speaking about not following the rules.
Yeah. One of the individuals that has been under surveillance, or investigation, I should say, has been Loretta Lynch. And it's recently been uncovered that she was using an alias while emailing about the Bill Clinton meeting that was prior to the ruling with James Comey over the summer, saying Hillary did nothing wrong, even though they said she did all this stuff wrong.
Yeah, so this story, I actually know a lot about this. I followed a lot of, when this was breaking on Twitter, pretty much read everything that had to go about it. So when the DNC was hacked, or this might have been in one of the WikiLeaks, whichever one it was, when they released a lot of emails, there was one person who was on there who was using the email name. Let's see if I can find it here. It was, 1 second, Elizabeth Carlisle. And people weren't able to find records of anyone named Elizabeth Carlisle working there. So they weren't quite sure why this person with the name Elizabeth Carlisle was emailing, very important information, her emails, and no one knew who she was. Well, the reason she was caught was because when people were going through those emails, they realized she actually signed one of those emails, A.G. Lynch, which is the way that she signed her official emails for Attorney General Lynch. So she accidentally signed her name on the email account of her pseudonym, Elizabeth Carlisle. Now, I think they said that, Elizabeth is her middle name, and Carlisle is, the city in a book that she used to read that she was a fan of or something. I don't know. But either way, she was using a pseudonym when she was in office for her position. So yeah, and that was all in those emails that had to do with the Bill Clinton meeting. So.
On that tarmac for an hour the day prior to his wife's, court judgment. There might have been a little corruption going on there. I don't know. Especially when she has to hide her alias to do this stuff. So, I hope she goes away for a long time. I don't know if they're going to do anything. I always kind of doubt this stuff.
I don't know how illegal it is to use a pseudonym in your official work emails. Something tells me that's not legal, especially in government.
Yeah, that's...
But yeah, it's another one of those things I doubt anything's actually going to happen, but I certainly do hope it does.
Yeah, let's go into another person that's been up to some no good. So, Donna Brazile of, the Democratic Party, the investigator for Seth Rich, the private investigator, has said that there's a good chance that Donna Brazile was a person of interest in what happened with Seth Rich. You want to get into that, Bobby?
Yeah, so this, I'm just going to read from something that was written by Big League Politics. They said, in a shocking series of text messages sent from Fox News to reporter Malia Zimmerman by private investigator Rod Wheeler, he describes being, quote, startled by Donna Brazile, and states that her behavior, quote, makes me think that Donna Brazile is in a category of persons of interest as it relates to the death of Seth Rich. And then it goes on to say that, from Wheeler's notes, it says, Deli Camera was asked, were you aware that Seth Rich was having problems with 2 supervisors at his job in the DNC, and he was very emotionally upset because of his problems at the DNC? Deli Camera replied, I was aware that there were problems, but I don't know who the supervisors were that he was having problems with. Now, in a groundbreaking report, it was discovered that Donna Brazile, the former DNC chairwoman, tried to put an end to the Seth Rich investigations. She allegedly called the private investigator handling the case and accused him of snooping and demanded to know why the investigation was even still going on. So she's obviously, she's going out of her way to question why it's even happening and wanting it to stop. Which, Yeah, that would definitely make her a person of interest in the case. Because if there's nothing there and everyone's innocent, why don't you just let people investigate the case and figure out what actually happened?
And, the DC police haven't cooperated with any sort of investigation at all, and they're so quick to declare, oh, it's just a robbery that happened in broad daylight. Neither his phone or his wallet's even taken. And this was around the time of, the DNC convention. And, there's so much suspicion that Seth Rich was the guy that was leaking the DNC's, the DNC leaks to WikiLeaks, and not the Russians. But they refuse to look into this, and the mainstream media condemns anyone that even talks about this stuff.
Anyone that talks about it. And what's interesting is someone actually got a full transcript of Seth Rich's last phone call, which I guess he was making to a woman named Kelsey. I'm not sure if that was his girlfriend or not. But, I was reading this before the program, and this is really, really interesting what's happening. He's heard panting and running in the first part of the call, saying, "How could you do this to me? You knew this. That's why you left." She says, "Why are you doing this?" And he replies, "I love you. I loved you. How could you do this? You knew." She says, "Stop." And then she starts crying. And he says, "They are going to off me. You knew this. How could you do this?" And at that point, there's a sound of a thud, almost like a punch to the chest. And you hear Seth turn around and say, "Stop. Turn around. It doesn't have to end this way. Think of your family." And then he says back to the phone, he says, "How could you? How could you?" She's heard crying. You heard two bang bangs like gunshots. There's shuffling and a thud and a phone drop. It is at that point that all you hear is she continues to cry. She doesn't even ask, "Are you okay? What happened?" It's almost as if she knew exactly what was happening. So it's possible he might have actually been on the phone with his girlfriend when he was shot and killed twice. Because he was shot in the back as he was running away. It wasn't a suicide. Everyone knows it wasn't a suicide. So, that was information that was released on Twitter earlier when someone got the screenshot of that document. So, it's just very interesting that, once you start hearing about stuff like that, it just completely destroys the narrative that, it's just a regular robbery gone wrong.
Yeah, one could go on this Seth Rich says for quite a while, and a lot of it's speculation, but that's just because they won't let anyone look into it.
Yeah,
because they don't want any sort of corruption, discovered. And Donna Brazile is someone that has been involved with a lot of corruption. Just pointing back to the last thing that happened with her, she was giving those answers to the questions to the debates with Trump and Hillary prior. And she, admitted to doing that on CNN. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, so I guess we can move on to the next thing then, right?
Do you want to go into this polls that we have?
Yeah, we can do it real quick. I've read it, so.
Okay, so there is a poll out of Zero Hedge where most people globally consider America to be the biggest threat to peace.
Yep. So this was a poll that was released on August 1st of 2017, done by the Pew Research Center. And they polled people living in 30 nations, which first they surveyed them in 2013. Then they surveyed them again this year in 2017. And they asked them pretty much the same questions. They said the major threat category was selected by 35% of respondents worldwide for U.S. power and influence. 31% worldwide selected Russia's power and influence, and 31% worldwide said China's power and influence. However, they said that if you look in later pages of the PDF document that they released, of the 30 countries that have been surveyed in this poll, both in 2013 and 2017, most of these 30 nations are U.S. allies. Only Venezuela was clearly not. And it says none of the 30 countries was an ally of either Russia or China. So you're pretty much seeing that, people aren't selecting their enemies as the number one threat. They're selecting the United States, countries that they're allies with. And so, they believe that the United States is the biggest threat to security and peace in the entire world internationally. And, I don't blame them personally. I mean, the United States, especially the last 15 years or so, has been very, very hawkish and interventionist in terms of our foreign policy, especially in the Middle East. So I do not blame the people living in these countries believing that the United States, to them, is a major threat. Now, living inside the United States, I don't know how much of a threat we actually are. I know that, we've tried to influence elections all over the world. and then we complain if people try to influence ours. But yeah, that's just worth noticing that.
That's our perception in the world.
So,
let's go into this other thing that we have. People are saying about us internationally. There was a UN poll that recently declared that the U.S. government needs to pay reparations.
God, yeah, this was a UN panel, and this was the let me see if I can. Yeah, the exact name. It's the UN's Working Group of Experts on Peoples of African Descent, which reports to the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, presented its findings to the UN Human Rights Council on Monday, according to the Washington Post. Yeah, but it says the panel wrote in a statement that it was, quote, extremely concerned about the human rights situation of African Americans, saying that there has been no real commitment to reparations, truth, and reconciliation for the people of African descent. And the panel likened the pattern of police officer killings of unarmed black men to lynching, which it referred to as a form of racial terrorism that has contributed to a legacy of racial inequality that the U.S. must address. And then it goes to talk about how, there's disproportionate crime numbers. But then at the end, it lays out the recommendation for the U.S. to, quote, assist in its efforts to combat all forms of racism, racial discrimination, Afrophobia, and related intolerance, which includes the profound need to acknowledge that the transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity. But it does say that the recommendations of the group are unlikely to influence the U.S. government, according to the report. But yeah, it puts it out there for everyone to see. And yeah, I guess it says that we need to pay reparations to the African Americans.
People that never held slaves need to pay money to people that never were slaves. That's all I need to say. That's insane. I don't see how people think that'd be just. And everyone would have to pay for these reparations. People that are immigrants that came after the Civil War, my own family was in the United States during the Civil War, but I would be expected to pay reparations? That's insane. That's absurd. I don't get the basis of this.
Yeah, neither do I. And I just feel like, if the U.S. tried to pay reparations, that wouldn't exactly go over well with a lot of people. Probably.
I feel like it would be widely hated.
Yeah, it would be widely hated by pretty much everyone that's not in the African American community, because if you start, especially if you're using taxpayer money to do it, you can't just target white Americans to do that. They'd probably be targeting Hispanics and Asians as well, and they're definitely not one to pay reparations. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Yeah. We got two more things before current year college craziness. Let's try to get into them pretty quick and get into current year college craziness. We have some stuff in regards to the DNC being sued once again. There's already the class action against them on behalf of Bernie supporters, and the primaries being screwed over. But this is actually to do with some collusion with the Ukraine during the election, which we mentioned prior.
Right. So the watchdog group, the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, which is a FACT, F-A-C-T, have filed a complaint against the FEC over alleged collusion between the DNC and Ukraine. It says they filed a complaint with the FEC Wednesday alleging that the DNC violated federal laws by soliciting opposition research on the Trump campaign from a foreign government. Now, if you remember when we were talking about the whole Trump Jr. meeting with that Russian person, it's not illegal to receive information. What is illegal is paying people to do it. Paid opposition, or pretty much paying these people.
Foreign governments cannot spend money in the United States. Foreign citizens to influence politics. Foreign citizens can't do that either.
Right. So it's the difference between voluntarily receiving something and actually soliciting it. Now, the FACT alleges that they violated the ban by knowingly soliciting a valuable in-kind contribution in the form of opposition research and information on a Trump campaign official from a foreign national on behalf of the DNC. The complaint is based on an investigation by Politico, which found that the person from the DNC met with top officials in the Ukrainian embassy in Washington in an effort to expose ties between Trump, top campaign aide Paul Manafort, and Russia. So yeah, what's even interesting is Representative Adam Schiff from California, who's a Democrat, hates Trump. He even admitted during an interview on ABC's program This Week that collusion between the DNC and the Ukraine actually was an issue. So yeah, even the DNC knows that this is not, this isn't a joke to talk about. Like, this is a serious issue. And unlike the whole Russian investigation where there is no evidence of collusion, there's direct evidence of pay-to-play solicitation going on here.
Yeah, so when, Trump gets accused of, he colluded with the Russians, and then people aren't critical of the DNC colluding with the Ukrainians, which there is evidence for, but, people just don't know, I guess. You're a hypocrite. I mean, what else is there to say about you?
Yeah, that's precisely right. So, I hope that lawsuit actually goes somewhere, but, like a lot of these things, something tells me I doubt it's going to go anywhere. But you never know.
The last thing that we have here is a thing in Texas, our state, on mail-in ballot fraud and making that a felony.
Yeah, so one of the things that when Governor Abbott of Texas here, he called a special session of the legislature to pass some bills that hadn't been addressed during the last meeting of the legislature. So one of those bills was legislation that would increase the penalties for mail-in ballot fraud. Now, we've talked about mail-in ballot fraud in this show, especially up in the Dallas area. There was a lot of it back in the 2016 election.
I think we reported on the program like 3 or 4 months ago about that.
Yeah. So we've been talking about that for a long time. But one of the bills that Abbott himself was saying, I want you guys to pass this, I want you to put that on my desk so I can sign it into law, was a bill to change it from just being a misdemeanor to an actual felony, to intentionally submit false information on a mail-in ballot application, or knowingly submit and alter an application without a voter's knowledge. Now, they said that some Democrats were opposed to the bill because of a provision that also makes it a felony to try to influence a person, usually including a family member, when they have a mail-in ballot. So if you're someone who's trying to influence them to commit fraud, that's also a felony as well. So it appears like that's the thing that Democrats didn't like. But it passed the Texas Senate on a vote of 21-10, and Greg Abbott did sign it into law. So it's officially law now. If you commit mail-in ballot fraud in Texas and you're caught, that's a felony, not just a misdemeanor.
Good stuff to hear. Always, the Texas legislature has been pretty busy this summer, and they're doing some good stuff.
And their special session is set to end at the end of this upcoming week here. So they've only got 1 week left to do whatever else they have to do.
Yeah. Let's get into current year college craziness.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic. You're fucking a white male!
The assumption that women are naturally better caregivers is part of patriarchy.
Die, sis, stop.
You will not divide us! You will not divide us! You will not divide us! You will not divide us!
It's time for some current year college craziness.
Current year college craziness, the segment that each week keeps on giving us more ridiculous stories, and we got a good number of them this week. This is the segment of the show where we talk about the craziness that happens on college campuses and kind of give insight to craziness that happens on college campuses since we know the stuff firsthand. But the first story that we have such a doozy. A professor has recently said that doctors telling fat people to lose weight is both fat shaming and a microaggression.
Yes, this was a psychology professor was giving a lecture at an academic conference Thursday, claiming that, quote, medical fat shaming at the doctor's office is mentally and physically harmful. His name is, or maybe it's her name, it doesn't actually say, Joan Chrysler asserted that doctors repeatedly advise weight loss for fat patients rather than CAT scans or blood work, and also commit microaggressions like wincing at their medical charts. Ooh, bad, Enzo, bad. But Chrysler acknowledged that it is impossible to prove causation behind her claim that fat shaming has negative health consequences, pointing out that it would be unethical to do such an experiment. Which is pretty much saying, yeah, I made this up, but you know, there's no way you could prove me wrong because, you know, that'd be bad.
Otherwise, you're morally wrong for disproving my point that I make, but I'm somehow an intellectual.
Yeah, so by telling fat people that they need to lose weight, that's suddenly now a bad thing, according to this professor. And according, you know, apparently that's bad for their health, even though that's like, you know, good for your health. But, you know, I guess it's a microaggression, too, to wince at their chart. So next time you're in the hospital, Enzo, and you look at someone's chart, don't wince at them because that's a microaggression.
It's such an absurd statement. What kind of clown world are these colleges? It's not good to be obese, but we're just trying to make it acceptable because this nation is already so obese and it's only getting worse. And, you know, that's one of the biggest reasons why healthcare is so bad. I mean, it's just not healthy. But now we're just trying to normalize, you know, being obese and not actually encourage people to even improve themselves. And that's just, it's just, you know, trying to legitimize mediocrity. And that's not something productive towards society.
No, it's not. And neither, I guess, is the next story that we have to talk about either.
Also related to the fat. So, a fat studies course has recently deemed weightism a social justice issue.
Yeah, they said that the fat studies course is returning, not just being added, but returning to Oregon State University next spring, where students will be able to earn 3 credits to explore, quote, forms of activism used to counter weightism perpetuated through various social institutions. The professor is Patty Lou Watkins, saying, my course now frames body image and disturbances more as a function of oppressive societal structures, rather than of individual pathology. And they're trying to teach students that weight-based oppression is a social justice issue. I guess that'd be like calling people fat or discriminating against the fat people. But they said the students will examine body weight, shape, and size as an area of human difference subject to privilege and discrimination that intersects with other systems of oppression based on gender, race, class, age, sexual orientation, and ability. So we're adding something to that list, Enzo. We're now adding body weight, size, and shape to it.
I don't even know what to say. Social justice. Justice for people being fat?
Oh no, you're going to hate this next part. She says, I grew to embrace feminist pedagogy in terms of course content as well as classroom practices. My course now frames body image disturbances more as a function of oppressive societal structures rather than individual pathology. So of course it's a feminist, Enzo. It's a feminist.
Which, if you don't know what pedagogy is, that's the study of teaching. So she's talking about incorporating stuff like fat studies into
feminist
teaching, which is probably going to be done at like the high school level. So your kids are being indoctrinated by these people already in college, but they're aiming lower because they're so, you know, agenda driven.
God, I'm so glad I graduate soon. I really am.
Yeah, I'm getting sick of college, especially how crazy it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's gotten so worse since I've entered college.
It's the current year, Enzo.
It is the current year, 2017. So let's get into this next one. So the University of Georgia has a professor that is letting students pick their own grades for stress reduction. Now, we do have an update on the story before we get into it.
Yeah, before we get into it, before we talk about the story, after this kind of went viral, like, you know, when I was on vacation, we were listening to, like, you know, talk radio and stuff, and even Rush Limbaugh himself brought up this professor. So this is something that's been reaching the masses, this story. And before we even talk about it, the professor has, after backlash from, like, the internet and people talking about it in the media, the professor has taken away this policy. But the fact that the professor put the policy in there to begin with that that shows you how that professor's line of thinking is. But what the professor is doing, or at least was doing, was going to let their students choose their own grades for stress reduction. Now, the University of Georgia professor adopted a policy to have a stress reduction policy that will allow students to select their own grades if they, quote, feel unduly stressed by the ones that they earned. Similarly, students who feel stressed by group dynamics are allowed to walk away from their groups without explanation and will only be graded on non-group work. The professor acknowledges that this policy might hinder the development of group skills and mastery of the class material, but says that it is each student's policy. So, Enzo, if you get a C in the class and you feel that you earn an A, no questions asked, you're going to get an A. What do you feel about that?
I mean, that'd be cool, but it's like also anti-intellectual and like, you know, the opposite of why you went to college, to learn and like have practical skills to give back to, you know, the workforce.
Not only that, but similarly, when it comes to tests and exams, for Watson's data management and energy informatics courses, they will all be open book and open note exams. They're designed to assess low-level mastery of the course material. So low-level mastery, I guess? That's pretty interesting.
Absurd.
All right.
So the next story that we wanted to get into is in regards to a case of accused rape at a college, and the student that was cleared of rape in corp is still being investigated by the college. You want to give us specifics, Bobby?
Yeah, this kind of angered me when I first heard about it. So there was a University of Southern California college student, Armand Premji, and I guess he was accused of raping a woman. But due to the video surveillance footage that was released, the judge says it gives a very strong indication that the female accuser was actually the one who initiated what appears to have been consensual sex. However, the college's Title IX office is still continuing its investigation, even though the judge pretty much dismissed the case. And the surveillance video shows the unnamed 19-year-old accuser, who is a fellow USC student, kissing him outside of a nightclub where the two met. And then she makes a sexual gesture with her hands, sticking her index finger through a circle she formed with her other hand behind Premji's back to a friend outside the club. And the two are also seen getting into an Uber ride before the accuser leads Premji back to her dorm where she signed him in. So, and then I guess they went up and they had sex. But the accuser claims that she doesn't remember making the sexual gesture nor giving consent because she was so intoxicated. But the California judge dismissed the case, and the New York Times reported that the judge said during the preliminary hearing last week that he believes that the sex was consensual and that the videos were a very strong indication that the woman was the initiator according to the results. But yeah, it's still bad because the campus investigation is continuing due to a 2014 rule which requires college students to receive, quote, active consent in California. And Title IX rules say that an intoxicated person is incapable of giving such affirmative consent. But, that really kind of pisses me off because you got the state itself that's saying, I don't think this guy did anything wrong, and yet a school which is run by the state themselves is saying, no, he definitely did, because, you got to have the active consent, and because she was drinking, she couldn't give consent, but, he was probably drinking too if they came out of a nightclub, so you can't really say he gave consent either. Therefore, it's equally possible that, since she was seen on the camera making that, sticking one finger through a circle made the other fingers, indicating that she wanted to have sex with the guy, she would have been the one that instigated it. So, if anything, she was the one who was raping him, right?
Yeah, kind of wishy-washy. But, this just kind of points to a problem that we've seen over the years. Past years, I've seen it more talked about, especially around the UVA rape hoax thing. But, these colleges have kangaroo courts where, if say your son is accused of rape on a college campus and he didn't do it, they'll go to the farthest extent possible to get you expelled purely because you're a man. And they've many times said before they have to presume guilt. instead of, innocent till proven guilty, because, women don't lie, and, like, we have to fight rape culture and stuff. It's disgusting, insane, stupid.
Yeah, it's terrible. But I hope that guy gets off scot-free, because, I don't think he did anything wrong personally, especially since, a judge in California, which I assume is not exactly the most conservative person, even said, there's evidence to show that he didn't do this. He wasn't the one, he wasn't the one pushing it. It was the woman he was with. So, yeah, that's that.
Let's get into some stuff at Columbia. It looks like there's been some training by teachers to incorporate feminism and neo-Marxism into their courses.
Yeah, so a school affiliated with Columbia University is training their future teachers in feminist and neo-Marxist courses and other social justice-oriented theories, according to its 2017 course catalog. The Teachers College at Columbia offers a variety of courses and programs which teach graduate students to incorporate social justice principles into their future students' coursework. The C&T Contemporary Curriculum Studies examines, quote, a range of theoretical stances including neo-Marxist, feminist, post-structuralist, post-foundational, critical race theory, and queer scholarship. So does that sound like anything you're interested in, Enzo?
No, but you gotta indoctrinate the kids young.
Well, speaking of indoctrinating, the doctoral studies students are specializing in diversity and equity in education. They must take the course called Advanced Seminar in Diversity and Equity. Not equality, equity. And the course will examine concepts like diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism. And students will learn to question, reframe, and interpret dominant ideologies of schooling.
Dominant ideologies of schooling. I'm someone that knows pedagogy pretty well.
Oh, not only that, Enzo. Other courses are exploring how ableism functions in schools, how disability, race, and gender interact with the construct of giftedness, and how gender-sensitive curricula operates in the classroom. So now it's the construct of giftedness. Much like how race is a social construct, Enzo, now giftedness is also a social construct as well.
Oh my god. Okay, I'm going to touch on that. Being gifted is a social construct, which would imply that one is not inherently gifted. It's just the perception of society that gives one the recognition of being gifted, as though results are not indicative of something objective. No, it's some sort of social thing. This is stupid as all hell. Ugh, I hate these people so much.
Well, luckily neither of us goes to the Teachers College at Columbia University. But you know who did go to Columbia University?
Who?
Barack Obama.
Huh.
Coincidence? I think not.
Not a big fan.
But, yeah, that's all for that story.
Let's go on this next one. It's pretty goddamn absurd. So, colleges are trying to ban the surname Lynch because it offends minorities.
Yeah, so a school board in Portland, Oregon has decided to take up the gauntlet for intersectionality. No, they are not raising awareness about Sweden becoming the rape capital of Europe, or Christian genocide in the Middle East, or the growing concern of terror in the world. Instead, they are allowing themselves to be triggered by the surname Lynch. On Wednesday, the Centennial School District, which covers the areas of southeast Portland, voted to change the name of a local school's Lynch Meadows Elementary School, Lynch View Elementary School, and Lynchwood Elementary School because the name Lynch is triggering to those special snowflakes, according to a Fox News report. The schools were originally named to honor the wealthy Lynch family, who donated the land to the local government for the purpose of building schools in public places. However, because the term lynch mob has a historically negative connotation associated with racism, there have been a few complaints from locals who are unfamiliar with the history of the area. So literally, because people are triggered by the word, the family that donated the land for the purpose of building the schools, that they decided to name the schools after, which is, that's one of the most common occurrences out there when people donate large sums of money to schools, is they name things after the person who did it. I mean, even at our campus, there's multiple buildings that are named after the people who donated to have those buildings built. Just because that person had a last name that is the same word as something that's triggering to people, you shouldn't be changing those names. That's disrespectful, at a minimum to the family.
Yeah, and Lynch is just like a very common African American surname. Like, we were just talking about Loretta Lynch earlier. Like, it's offensive to minorities, but like, there's a lot of minorities that are named Lynch. Like, it's kind of...
Loretta being one of them.
Yeah, it's really strange. Marshawn Lynch, it's another...
Well, I like Marshawn Lynch better than I like Loretta.
Yeah.
At least, Marshawn Lynch is good at one thing, as long as they give him the ball. He's on the Raiders this year. He's not on the Seahawks anymore, so just saying.
I don't know too much about football, but...
I love my football.
Let's get into this last story. So, Stanford, which is on this show all the time about stuff we have to report about, is offering an abolishing whiteness course.
Yep. So Stanford University is slated to offer a class this fall called White Identity Politics, during which students will survey the field of whiteness studies and discuss the possibilities of abolishing whiteness, according to the course description. And then they went on to say that the upper-level anthropology seminar will draw from the field of whiteness studies and from contemporary writings that push whiteness studies in new directions. Now, they're talking about this because of like white identity politics and things that have happened regarding that. But the course will be taught by the instructor John Patrick Moran at Stanford University. And they said that the spokesman for Stanford, Ernest Miranda, he wrote in an email saying, "Abolishing whiteness is a concept put forward in the 1990s by a number of white historians. Their belief was that if other white people would, like them, stop identifying politically as white, it would help end inequalities." So you hear that, Enzo? The inequalities exist because they identify politically as white. I wasn't exactly sure that white was a political party, but I guess it is now.
That is kind of strange. Isn't being white just like your race? Like, it's... What?
Exactly.
But being white needs to be abolished, I guess?
Imagine if they had an abolishing blackness course. Talking about getting rid of
Oosh, that would be edgy.
You think they'd allow that to go? I doubt it. Or an abolishing Latino-ness course. An abolishing Orientalness course. Get rid of the Orientals. Get rid of
Yeah, it's pretty offensive, but I guess whites aren't allowed to take offense to it.
I guess so. But
let's take the break now, and when we come back, we'll get into international news, and then we'll get out of here.
All right, that sounds good to me.
Hey, Patriots and Warriors, this is Bass Stickman, and you are listening to Trump Republic Radio.
We were minding our own business, trying to celebrate the free speech that you think is so important, and you came to our rally and you chanted, "You're fags. Go home. You have low testosterone."
And he's been on many very prominent right-wing shows talking about his cause, and that would be Simon Roach of the Saidlanders.
Hello Enzo, hello Robert. Thank you very much for having me.
Let me say this. It has been my privilege. You won't see it from my perspective, so I'm not going to, it's pointless me trying to persuade you. But you will, let me just tell you, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I appreciate it very much. And if you'd like me to come on again at any time, hopefully there will be fewer difficulties and challenges, and I won't mess you around as I have done this time, for which I'm very sorry. But I would love to come on again. Anytime you ask, I'll be there.
Please call China and tell them we are all counting on China. Tell the president we became friends for 2 days, that he was great.
You really have to walk me through this here, because I am not familiar with so much of the terminology. Like, for instance, can you shed some light on what is a cuck?
A cuck.
How much money will you make today banging that drum for Soros? Soros must pay you good money to bang that drum. play ping pong?
Okay, welcome back from the break. We're gonna get in some international news. Not the most international news that we usually have, but
since we talked about North Korea early in the program, that was most of the international news.
Most of the stuff, yes. But let's get into some stuff that happened out of Europe. The first thing that we wanted to talk about was kind of a strange incident. There were some Chinese tourists that were arrested at the Reichstag for seig heiling.
Yep, they said German police have arrested 2 Chinese tourists for making illegal Hitler salutes in front of the Reichstag building, which is where the German parliament is. They said the Berlin officials say that they detained 2 men aged 36 and 49 after they were seen striking the pose and photographing each other with their mobile phones. They face charges for using symbols of illegal organizations, the police said in a statement. They were released after posting bail of 500 euros each. Now, Germany has strict laws on hate speech and symbols like Hitler and the Nazis. And, I guess it's illegal to do a Sieg Heil in front of the Reichstag.
Well, yeah, they have a lot of laws like that in Germany towards the denazification process that they took after World War II. But, yeah, it's kind of strange because, like, they're not German. Like, they can't be Nazis.
Yeah.
Guess they're doing it as like a joke or something.
I mean,
but
I sincerely doubt they were doing it seriously. It was, the fact that they were Chinese, if anything.
Chinese people can't be Nazis.
Yeah,
that's just insane.
I strongly feel they were doing that as a joke, and the fact that they had to pay 500 euros each to get released on bail, like, it's just stupid,
Yeah.
If anything, walk up to them and say, "Hey, you can't do that here. Like, that's frowned upon. Don't do it." And if you say that to people, most people will stop.
Yeah.
But, I guess they had to go and arrest them, so.
Let's get into the other thing we have for Europe here. We have a poll in regards to Sweden and the rape crisis epidemic that is happening there. The poll shows less than 19% of Swedish girls feel unsafe to be outside out of fear of migrants. You want to go in that, Bobby, for us?
Yep. They said that... Well, it actually came after a story kind of came out about a woman who was raped. They said in the Swedish region of I'm totally going to butcher this name, but it's Västmanland. A woman was living in the house in the town together with her children, and her house had previously been the home of a so-called unaccompanied refugee child. Now, according to the district court records of the area, the former resident, accompanied by his brother and 3 men, went back to his house in November 2016 to greet the family which had sheltered him. They stayed 2 nights, after which the mother reported to the police that her 14-year-old daughter had been raped by one of them, a 25-year-old from Syria. The rape took place in the 14-year-old girl's room, and the man invited her to drink liquor, and as a result, the girl was more or less unconscious due to being intoxicated. She said she only has vague memories of the incidents, but remembers appealing to the attacker to stop as he was raping her. Now, after that information got released and more started coming out, there was a poll that was taken in the area about Swedish girls, and that's exactly what it ended up saying, was that less than 19%, it was only like 18 point, see if I can find it here, it was like 18.3 or something like that. Only 18, but yeah, less than 19% of Swedish girls actually feel safe nowadays walking outside due to fear of attacks by migrants. You never had this problem years ago, but now they've taken in so many that, less than 19%, that's less than 1 in 5. You could easily say that 4/5 of them don't feel safe going outside due to fear of migrant attacks. Like, that's not how a European civilization should have to live.
Yeah, and this was one of the most peaceful societies to ever exist, Sweden. They always uphold it as this great bastion of utopian socialism, although it's not exactly that. But this is a thing that's popped up ever since the migrant crisis. If you just follow the statistics, that had a huge responsibility in what they're dealing with now. And I mean, they're still taking in migrants, by the boatloads. And it's not going to stop. And they have one of the highest per capita rates of rape in the world, which is crazy for a Western nation.
I mean, yeah, that's, like you said, that's why it's being known as one of the rape capital of the Western world. So,
yeah, it's real bad there.
Nothing good is happening over there.
Let's get into some Middle East stuff. So I got two stories here out of stuff coming out of Israel. The first one that we have here is Israel is looking to expel Al Jazeera journalists and block Al Jazeera broadcasts in Israel.
Yeah. Israel has announced plans to effectively expel Al Jazeera network from their country, revoking journalists' credentials, shutting the company's bureau in Jerusalem, and pulling its broadcast from national cable and satellite television. They said that we are going to set measures in order to illustrate our war on terrorism, on radical Islam, and our solidarity with the sane Arab world. They said while the proposal will not take immediate effect, they confirmed that both the Arabic and English versions of the news channel will be shuttered once the proposal is passed in Israel's parliament. Now, the guy who is the spokesperson said, "I am the only one who is an Arabic speaker, who understands Arabic, and my native language is Arabic. You cannot fool me with Al Jazeera English and Al Jazeera Arabic. I know how to identify how disturbing reporting becomes incitement instead of being free speech." So what are your thoughts on the Israeli government shutting down a news service because they don't want it to push their propaganda?
It's interesting. Al Jazeera is the state-funded news station for Qatar. So, I don't know, the Qataris don't necessarily hold Israel in high regards. I mean, there's legitimate criticism of what Israel does, no doubt. But, I don't know, I guess these states just hate each other so much they're willing to take these measures. I don't think it's great. I don't think Al Jazeera is great either.
No, I mean, let's say something like that was happening in the U.S., and it kind of is. You got networks like CNN and MSNBC constantly pushing, propaganda pieces that many times have no basis in reality, or they'll have a very slanted bias to the news to the point where they're not actually telling the true story. I believe in the Constitution. I love the Constitution. I love the First Amendment. I love freedom of speech. I love freedom of the press. But I can understand exactly where Israel's coming from here. You have a news network that's actively working against the interest of your country. And they said, yeah, we're just going to get rid of you. So, I can almost sympathize with their standpoint from that.
Yeah, some weird stuff happened out there. But another thing that happened this week in Israel is Benjamin Netanyahu has recently been accused of some corruption allegations. And he recently made a statement that, quote, I won't be toppled. I have nothing to fear. You want to go in more in detail on that, Bobby, for us?
Yeah, they said apparently he lashed out in a private conversation with the Israeli parliament members, and also with the press, the opposition, and the members of his own party, whom he accused of conspiring to unseat him. He said, they are trying to get me, they are trying to get me and attempting to topple the right, Netanyahu told senior officials in his coalition, according to the report. This is not new. They've been trying for many years. I don't see us going to elections now. So I don't know if that means he's going to cancel elections or they're just not going to hold them. That kind of sounds pretty dangerous.
That's pretty crazy.
Me. Yeah. But he says, it's not like I'm going tomorrow and they're going to replace me, he said. I don't know what they want from me. I have nothing to fear. I don't think I have a problem. He's slammed the transportation minister for undermining him and accused him of being behind an anonymous quote in, I guess, one of their newspapers, according to a senior Likud figure, saying he would not permit Netanyahu to remain in power if he is indicted. So, Netanyahu is pretty much just saying that all these people that are in their government, he's saying all these people that are working for my government are trying to undermine me and get me fired from my job. Boy, doesn't that sound familiar to something that's happening over here.
Yeah.
So, but he said, he said, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right where I'm at, which also sounds familiar to something that's happening over here. So I don't think they're going to get rid of Netanyahu. He's generally liked in his region, at least I think, according to the polls I've seen, unless you've seen anything different.
Yeah, he's generally liked in Israel. He's been in power for quite a while now. But, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Netanyahu. I read his book, A Durable Peace, Israel and Its Place Amongst the Nations. I don't know. I think it's very likely that he's been involved in corruption. So, yeah, maybe you should be convicted on, or there should be an investigation.
Well,
we'll see what happens.
If an investigation finds him innocent, then great. An investigation finds him guilty,
Yeah.
well, then they'll just,
Take him out of
go
office.
and see what happens there. So,
be kind of unstable for Israel, though.
yeah, I guess that's all we have for Israeli news right now.
Yeah, let's get into this last thing we have for the Middle East. The White House is considering privatizing the Afghanistan War.
Yeah, this is actually great news if you think about it. So the White House is actively considering a bold plan to turn over a big chunk of U.S. war in Afghanistan to private contractors in an effort to turn the tide in the stalemated war, according to the former head of a security firm pushing the project. They said under the proposal, 5,500 private contractors, primarily former special operations troops, would advise Afghan combat forces. The plan also includes a 90-plane private air force that would provide air support in the nearly 16-year-old war against Taliban insurgents, according to USA Today and Eric Prince, who is the founder of a Blackwater security firm. Now, the U.S. currently has about 8,400 troops there to train and guide local forces, but they don't have direct combat roles, and they would be replaced by these contractors. So, for all the people that are saying, we need to get out of the Afghanistan war, this is a great opportunity to get our guys out of the war. Instead, send in these private contractors who can fight for us. That way we don't have to risk, like our own troops. We're only risking people who want to go over there and who want to get paid to do it. And the thing is they don't really have to follow all the same rules that the United States military has to follow when they're over there. Obviously, there are some rules because it's, international mercenaries pretty much at that point. But yeah, one of the things that I had heard, and I think I might have mentioned this on a previous episode, I'm not sure, but when Trump was meeting with his national security advisors, he even asked them what are our options for completely just getting out of Afghanistan altogether. So that's definitely a change from the past two administrations, one of which who got us into Afghanistan, and one of which, kept us in there and didn't really do much. But people want us gone. We've been there for 16 years now. It's not going anywhere. So this would be the perfect opportunity to get our troops home, just send in private contractors who can do it on their own, and then don't have to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, it's better. I mean, I don't necessarily care about continuing any sort of fight in Afghanistan, but it's better that we're getting American soldiers out. The fight against the Taliban in Afghanistan has picked up in the last couple of months. We sent 1,000 troops recently, a couple months ago back in.
Now, one of the biggest complaints that people have is the cost of fighting these wars. The Pentagon currently has $40 billion budgeted this year specifically for operations in Afghanistan. Now, they said the cost to hire the Blackwater and send those guys over there and provide equipment for them and stuff like that is only $10 billion a year. So a quarter of the cost. Think about that. You can bring all our troops home, and at a quarter of the cost, solve the problem. I'm all for that. If that's
that's much better. I mean, that's an improvement. Yeah.
You could lower military. You can lower military and domestic spending because of that too.
You need to spend on something else. I don't know, maybe a wall. That'd be enough money to fund a wall.
$40 billion they have budgeted minus the $10 million that it would cost. That's $30 billion extra dollars you have. The wall is only going to cost maybe 2/3 that at most.
Yeah,
you
around
fund the wall
20
with that,
billion. Yeah.
In 1 year. So
yeah, do it.
So yeah, I'm all for that. I hope they do it.
Let's get into some stuff out of North and South America. The first thing we want to talk about is the ongoing situation in Venezuela. There was recently an anti-government attack on a military base, attempted coup, or maybe not coup, wrong words. But the Venezuelan state has crushed them.
Yeah. So this happened on August 6th. Now, Venezuelan authorities, they quelled an attack on a military base near the city of Valencia by soldiers and armed civilians by soldiers and armed civilians.
So yeah, it would be a coup in some sense.
In some sense, I doubt it was a full scale, but some military members who were PO'd and decided to join armed civilians. That's pretty much the way it would have been. But they ended up killing 2 of them in a dramatic escalation of unrest in the South American nation. They said there was a pre-dawn raid that coincided with a video which circulated social media showing more than a dozen men in military uniforms announcing an uprising to restore constitutional order following the creation of a pro-government legislative superbody on Friday, condemned internationally as a power grab by President Nicolas Maduro. Now, these people then went on and they attacked the... they said in his weekly televised show, the unpopular socialist leader condemned the attackers as mercenaries. He said around 20 armed men had entered the fort of Paramacay near Valencia, about 2 hours west of the capital Caracas, before dawn, surprising guards and making straight for the weapons cache. So they pretty much tried to steal their weapons, which is very similar to, if you remember from the Civil War, or maybe it was right before the Civil War. John Brown tried to raid Harper's Ferry.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to steal the weapons and start a slave uprising. So this is, kind of similar in the way that they did it. They wanted to storm the military base and steal all the weapons to try to lead an uprising against the government.
The stuff in Venezuela has gotten so bad. I mean, we've been talking about the currency every single week for the last, 2-3 weeks now, reporting on how the hyperinflation is going. It's gotten extremely bad. Something like 90% of the country cannot sufficiently afford to feed themselves. What was the average, pounds lost in the last year?
I think they said the average adult had lost, I think it was 15 pounds in the last year or year and a half or something like that.
I think it was 12 to 15 or something.
I remember it being 15.
Okay.
But yeah.
Insane. And another thing about Venezuela, which I don't like, Trump recently said this week that we are looking to maybe intervening militarily in Venezuela to restore order.
He said that was an option.
An option. I don't want that on the table, though.
I definitely don't.
I don't want to waste money out there. It almost seems like an extension of the Monroe Doctrine, because they were saying oh, this isn't our backyard, but it's just no, that's in South America. It's a completely different continent. Let's just stick to where we are.
I keep saying let Venezuela fail. They decided to go the route of socialism, and they're now paying the price for that. And unfortunately, hundreds of people are dying. And if it devolves into civil war, which is a very likely scenario at this point, hundreds of thousands of people may die before this thing is over.
Yeah, very likely.
So
it's always sad to talk about it. But let's get into some things that we have coming out of Canada. It looks like Canada is now sending troops to its U.S. border to stop the flow of migrants coming up.
Yeah, I think this was completely hilarious. They said that a lot of migrants are now leaving the U.S. and going to Canada because of Trump's crackdown on illegal immigrants. And, Canada has been pretty welcoming to foreigners, especially refugees, under Justin Trudeau. Now, Canada, though, they have a lot stricter immigration laws than the United States.
They have a point-based system like what we're trying to get with the RAISE Act.
Yeah, so, if you like Canada, just, do that. But they said that it's gotten so bad that the Canadian government is now sending soldiers to remote locations along the U.S. border where they know illegal immigrants have been crossing in large areas. They said that the soldiers will help the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties, and the Canadian Border Services agencies at the site. They said they are preparing a place for tents that can hold almost 500 people. They will also be installing lighting and heating equipment. They said that the military says the soldiers won't play a role in security and won't be helping with law enforcement. However, the military says that once the site is completed, only a few soldiers will stay behind. The rest will go back to their home base. So, pretty much the soldiers are there to help the police establish, areas where they can house all these migrants that they catch.
But it's really getting out of hand.
Yeah. And
they haven't used the military.
They estimated that, and this was last Sunday, keep in mind, when this article was published, they said that the migrants fear that the U.S. is becoming less welcoming and have decided to try their luck crossing into Canada. However, officials estimate that 400 people crossed the border at the site on Sunday alone. 400 people in one day illegally crossing into Canada. Yeah, you can understand now why they're wanting to send troops to their borders.
Yeah. It's a lot, and that's going to affect the local populace where they're coming through negatively. So, yeah, do what's best for your nation.
So, yeah, that's what we got to say about Canada.
Let's get into the very last story that we have this week. This is out of Asia, the Philippines. It looks like the U.S. may begin airstrikes against ISIS in the Philippines.
Yep. The authority to strike ISIS targets as part of a collective self-defense could be granted as part of an official military operation that may be named as early as Tuesday. Now, this is, next Tuesday, said the officials. The strikes would likely be conducted by armed drones. So it's not like we're going to be flying planes out there. It'd be more like drone strikes. Now, the Pentagon spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Christopher B. Logan, told NBC News Tuesday that the Philippines have not requested nor is the U.S. planning drone strikes in the Philippines. So it's interesting that even though this is it's on the table, the military is saying that the Philippines don't want it, and we are not planning to do it either. However, the official also said that collective self-defense doesn't necessarily mean airstrikes. So it's kind of one of those stories where no one's really sure what's happened. Even though they said that they're not planning to do it, they haven't actually ruled it out. They haven't said that they're not going to do it, if that kind of makes sense. So yeah, that's pretty much that. This also comes after a story came out on Monday, which I was originally going to leave.
The Tillerson thing?
Yeah, with Tillerson and Duterte. Now, Duterte told Tillerson, "I am your humble friend." And that's pretty much all that article had to say in it. So Duterte is, he's buddying up to the United States.
He's gone back and forth so many times. That's the one problem.
And I feel like if the U.S. offered to use drones to airstrike ISIS strongholds in the Philippines, I have a feeling Duterte would probably allow it. I don't really have any evidence to back that up. That's just kind of a gut feeling that I have.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the possibility that might end up happening. Even though I don't want us to see us get involved militarily anywhere, whether that be North Korea, whether that be the Philippines, or whether that be Venezuela, or even continuing in Afghanistan. I don't want us to have to send any troops into danger. I don't want us to have to waste any money on bombing anything. I don't want there to be any war. But if I had to choose any of these, I feel like we'd be a lot more justified by sending drones to the Philippines to help Duterte, because number one, he likes us. Number two, ISIS is pretty strong down there, and we need
they're fighting a war there
in any place that we can. So I feel like of all of them, this would probably be the most justified if we did get involved.
Yeah, this is a lot less egregious than a lot of the foreign interventions people have been talking about recently. But I don't have any other things on that subject. I mean, I guess we're done for the week.
I guess we are.
Probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the program, but we do accept donations if you'd like. It can be read on the air, or you could choose not to. But if you do like what we do and want to help expand the show and increase the quality of what we give out to you, you can donate to paypal.me/TrumpPublicRadio, and that link is also in the description. If you would like to email the program, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to email us at trumppublicradio@gmail.com, and that's also in the description. We don't know what we're going to do for the midweek show at this point. I'm sorry we didn't do one this last week. Traveling and pretty low energy.
Vacation, so.
We had to do that last Sunday show, not in the same room, which was kind of strange.
Yeah, it was the first time we'd ever done a show on Skype.
Yeah.
I think it did pretty well. We got a lot of downloads.
Yeah, it did very well. But with that said, I have nothing more. Thank you for listening to the show once again. We definitely appreciate everyone that listens and downloads the show.
Yeah, we love our listeners.
Yeah.
We have the best listeners. No one has
very best listeners.
Believe me.
And with that said, thank you for listening and have a good one.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.